What's up, guys? It is Modern Craftsman Monday. And this episode of the Modern Craftsman is brought to you by Huber Engineer Woods, makers of AdvanTech subfloor assembly and zip system building enclosure products. Be sure to follow at Huber Wood on Instagram as they celebrate reaching 25,000 followers in the next few weeks. And a special guest is going to kick off a giveaway featuring zip system stretch tape. So visit the at Huber Wood profile, that's Huber Wood, and hit the follow so you don't miss out. Also, for more building science discussion, visit zipsystems.homebuildingcrossroads.com to register for upcoming webinars. These events are going to focus on elevating business practices, including durable and energy-efficient building enclosures. Register today at zipsystem.homebuildingcrossroads.com. Now let's get into this Christine Williamson podcast and talk about dew point and the fact that it doesn't really matter where it is.
She doesn't like the word dew point.
Yeah, I don't think she wants to talk about it.
I know. I specifically was like, hey, can you explain to me where dew point is? And she's like, listen, it doesn't matter.
What's her handle?
At Building Science Fight Club.
Can't talk about it.
Don't.
Let's get into it.
I love your website.
Oh, thank you.
I just think it's so
but
it's
I like
casual, but yet I read it and I'm like, I get you. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not like someone boilerplate wrote something that was going to appeal to the masses. It's written to get a little bit of like aspect of you.
Yeah, I just added a section recently, like this week, or I guess last week, that I thought was really helpful for, I hope, not just people interested in hiring me, but about what building science consulting actually is, what it's like if you're working on a commercial project, what it's like if you're on a residential project, like what should your consultant do for you, and how much should you expect to pay for those services, and what does that mean about the rest of your team? Like, if you hire a consultant, does it mean that your architect is deficient, whatever. And that's a little different commercially and residentially. So I went into a bunch of detail and described like exactly what that stuff is. Cause I get asked all the time, I get asked for a menu of services. Like can you give me your list of services and rates? I'm like, well, usually, honestly, I don't even answer them. I get a lot of requests. I feel bad even admitting that. But if somebody's going into their project thinking that they can pay someone a couple $100 to, or even a couple $1,000 to just answer some questions on the phone and then they're done, that's it, the delta between me really helping you understand what you actually need, between what you think you need and what you actually do need, is too big, and it takes too much time for me to get you there. So I put it on my website. But lots and lots of consultants have that problem too. So I figured maybe I'll put it on my website and I'll be honest about it, and other people can find it helpful too, even if people don't hire me. And go, because I'm just one person, right? There's I can't do everybody's job, so other people can use it too, though.
Do you feel as though it's helped outlining it there?
Yeah, it's funny. I've only had it up like not even a week, and I get asked for to do work a lot, and I because I'm a sole practitioner, I don't take that many jobs. I just take the ones that I find professionally interesting and ones that I think I can really contribute to. And the client had read through this carefully and was like, I know exactly sort of what I want. And it also prevents a little bit of sticker shock when they see a proposal and it's a big number. They're not as surprised because they know what to expect. And so I'm less likely to waste my time working on a proposal for something that somebody's not going to, that they can tell me right away that they can't hire me. They don't have the resources on that project or whatever. So it's already been helpful. What I hope, though, is that it's helpful not just for me, but it really is helpful for other people. I remember I used to work for a big consulting firm, building science and structural consulting, WJE. And when I was applying for a job there, I, of course, like any job applicant, spend a lot of time on their website, and I couldn't really understand from their website what they did. I mean, I knew vaguely, right, they're a consulting company, so they give people advice, but I didn't understand, okay, so what form does that take? Like, what information do they need from a client? And then what information do they give back? Like, how? Is it on a drawing? Is it like, how do they get paid? Is it by the hour? Is it by the task? Is it, how, I had no idea. So I kind of figure if I didn't know, and I was serious enough to be applying for a job there, sort of embarrassing, but
Well, let me ask you something about that, because I think, you put it kind of simply in the fact that you could not tell what they did by reading their website.
Yep.
And I don't want this to be a branding exercise, but I think that's something that a lot of people kind of skip over. And they, I'm reading the book, Building a Story Brand. And they talk about this in the book, and they talk about how people tried to tell the story. It's like, established in 1978, and I started this company with my dad, and tell the story. Where it's like, that's all fine, and you can support what you do, but get right to the point. It's like, we build homes, or
But part of that is it's experience. They're telling the story of experience with that.
Right, but
without having to say I have a ton of experience, it's just there's that underlying.
That's true, but sometimes they do that and they sort of skip, like, well, what do you do? Are you painters? Are you carpenters?
I guess my question is, was it, is that the product of your website because you saw it elsewhere, or did you work with someone from like a branding standpoint or a marketing standpoint saying, I know what I want to do. I need to portray it in a way that is easily understandable?
No, I didn't work with anybody. I'm sure that a professional could make it a lot better. I'm kind of feeling around in the dark with this stuff, but I get a lot of feedback from Instagram, really, from yeah. I mean, in my professional life, I get feedback also because I'm always explaining things to people. So how clear and how I choose to explain stuff, I get feedback from that, but I get way more, like the volume of feedback and the specificity of the feedback through teaching on Instagram is really, I think it's really made me a lot more attentive to what the average person can reasonably understand in this industry, in this space. So that gives me a much better ability to communicate, even when it's on my personal website. When I used to teach before being on Instagram, I had no idea whether or not my audience like really understood what I was talking about. I didn't know if it was like, am I insulting them by telling them something that's so abundantly clear to them and that's boring? So am I boring them or insulting them, or both? Or am I presuming that they
right over their head
know something that they don't at all? Like, am I essentially telling them all about my professional experience when I haven't even told them that, hey, I'm a carpenter, I'm an electrician, I'm a whatever. People do this also. I see this, other people do this on Instagram too, because I'm curious about who follows me. They'll say what they do, but they don't say where they do it. So if you're, the internet's a big place. You don't know who's gonna find you, and it's helpful to know, well, if you're an architect and you practice in Dallas, and that's your main area, tell people that you're in Dallas. Helps them.
Well, especially in your industry where everything is so climate driven.
Yeah. And I mean, I work everywhere, but some people don't. Architects a lot of times really are local, and that helps them. That it's important to communicate that, but they forget. But that's okay. It's one of the things that's crazy about our industry, and this manifests itself in all kinds of other ways, is that just because you're good at one part of whatever it is that we do doesn't mean that you're good at other parts. So I'm pretty good at teaching, but I don't know anything about branding. Beyond just what I experience as a consumer.
I like the new logo.
Oh,
Same.
Thank you.
I said something.
It's clean as can be.
Pink. It's right to the point. Sticks
I found
out.
someone on Upwork. Have you guys heard of Upwork?
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a designer, and I think she was in Seattle or Portland. She was great. So she did it. It was nice, and there we go.
Well, for those that won't go to your website, can you kind of break down what it is you do and what the benefit, and we'll dig into like the benefits from a residential side?
She scares the crap out of everyone that watches her posts.
Yes.
Like every time she goes for a walk, I'm like, don't do something I have in my house right now. Don't find something I currently do.
Well, at least it's sort of anonymous though on Instagram. So would you rather, I'd rather sort of learn about something online when it's not my project than having somebody tell me to my face in front of a client, like, you should have done this other thing. But okay, what do? My background is in architecture and construction and building science. So basically I study the layers of our houses and buildings that separate the inside from the outside. And I pay attention to how those layers go together and make sure that they go together in a way that is going to be durable and safe and comfortable for the occupants and not cost too much to build or maintain. I also help people figure out what happened when things go wrong. So actually not so much what happened, but how to fix something when something goes wrong. So suppose you've spent $300 million on a museum and you can't control the humidity inside. You hire somebody like me to figure out, okay, what happened, what went wrong, how can we fix this, given that it's open to the public now. So what can we do that minimizes disruption to whatever is happening inside? Maybe it's a hospital, whatever it is. So that's the forensic side. And then on the new construction side, it's making sure that those types of things don't happen. Most of the failures I deal with are non-structural failures, and I'm not a structural engineer, so I don't pay attention. I mean, I pay attention a little bit to structure, but not. My primary goal isn't to make sure that something won't fall down. Our engineers are very good at this. Our building codes are very good. What we tend to have trouble with is keeping things dry, and not using too much energy, and being comfortable for occupants. And comfortable is a lot of things, like can be, you want an environment that's not too hot or cold, you want an environment that's not too humid or too dry, and you want an environment that's acoustically comfortable and that controls pests really well. There's all kinds of reasons why you want to pay attention to, we call them the control layers, and I help people do that. We don't learn this stuff in architecture school. It's really by apprenticeship, and it's really hard for a lot of architects to acquire that knowledge in their daily practice, in their professional practice. So I teach people on Instagram primarily, but also, people hire me to speak as well, or they hire me to come to their firms. We'll do a design charrette at an architecture firm, and we'll go through their standard details. So most architects, even though their projects look a lot different, they're not reinventing the wheel each time. So they've got only a certain collection of foundation details, a certain number of window details, wall to roof connections, and wall assemblies.
Yeah,
so the cladding types, exactly, the cladding type is going to be different. Sometimes it's brick, sometimes it's siding, sometimes it's stone, sometimes it's stucco. But the bones that end up producing that are usually pretty similar across different projects for any given firm.
Most of those come from an inventory that they have.
Yeah. And what's funny is a lot of times architects don't know, they don't really know where they've come from. It's just been sort of institutional knowledge that's been passed on, which is fine. It's reasonably effective, but sometimes something that you've been doing for a long time will think you've changed other things in your building, and maybe these things need to be adjusted in response to these other things. Maybe there are improvements to be made. It's good to revisit these things every now and then, but unfortunately, it's not. Architects feel they lack a lot of confidence a lot of times in evaluating their own risk when it comes to the enclosure, because it's they just don't get any formal training in it.
Mhm.
And the practical training it's hard. They have so many other responsibilities. So they don't know that much about how buildings really go together, and the science behind why they might prefer one type of material or another. So they don't know. So I try to help them.
I mean, most of the great architects that we know of weren't really known for their energy efficiency or, their details. It was more of their beauty and architecture. Like, I love that you put that on your website. Like, they're taste makers. Like,
Yeah.
I love how that kind of, it made such perfect sense to me when I read it. I was like, yep, I've seen a lot of that. So I think that's why your niche exists. Because
and it's funny how people they think there's sort of some shame in it, and I can understand why. It used to be like historically the master architect, master builder, and that one person did everything. Well, it's not practical for that to be the case anymore. You can't, these skill set, it's okay if these skill sets exist in different people. Design actually, it is really collaborative. So a lot of architects have a hard time admitting, especially to clients, admitting that they don't know certain things, or even admitting to themselves that they don't know what type of insulation they should use. They're a little fuzzy on what some of these details really should look like from a risk management perspective, and they're embarrassed by that, and they shouldn't be. They're responsible for so many things that's okay. There are people like me who do only this part and are happy to help them. I'm terrible at I made it through architecture school by the skin of my teeth. I was terrible as a designer. I like to think I have pretty good taste. So, and I continue to develop better taste, especially by seeing the beautiful work that you guys do. It's just spectacular. But there's a huge difference in appreciating good architecture and actually being able to be a great architect, to produce that. I guess like knowing when you're hearing good music and being a musician. Like those are different things.
Right.
So that's
different
okay.
universes. Yep.
Yeah, be good at design and let me do the technical stuff.
I've made the reference before. I spent 3.5 years in commercial high-rise construction, and what I've always, I always think back to is and the things that I loved about it is the level of coordination and the level of professionals that were involved. There was a building envelope engineer. There was, a mechanical, or the HVAC engineer, a plumbing engineer, electrical engineer, all of these things. Yes, we're talking about a $180 million building, so there's, more money that's put into that. There's level of coordination, but I always think how, and I've made the reference before, is that in residential construction, that stuff, usually gets cut because we're trying to scale back and trying to, extend our knowledge, the architect's knowledge, us as builders. A lot of design, a lot of things are design build, and in the field, the HVAC is usually figured out in the field with builder and HVAC contractor.
Yeah.
Where it's, I always like the fact that, or always consider the fact that planning all of this stuff out, the more stuff you can pre-plan for, the more successful it can be. And to your point, having someone design a beautiful home and then work with an envelope engineer, then you're getting both of those things, and you're not relying on one person to put a lesser percentage in all of those categories.
Yeah, exactly. And I've worked on some incredible homes, some incredible just private residences, and it's sort of shocking to me to see. I mean, it shouldn't be. I've seen enough of this, but I'll see stuff on like billionaires' homes that's not done as well. It doesn't even meet the standard of care as a typical like multifamily,
Right,
mid-range apartment complex.
and that's got to be
I see all over.
It's got to be incredibly frustrating.
Well, yeah, and why does that end up being the case? Well, because the billionaire client will hire somebody who's good at whatever the billionaire client cares most about. And that's okay. That's fine. Like that's perfectly natural. But what that ends up causing, what's not typical is for somebody who is really awesome at designing kitchens or whatever to also be a specialist on windows. And it's so you gotta assemble the right team, really. And some people are very good about that, and they know that they need to do that. And a lot of these residential homes, I try to tell people that, look, your home, this kind of home has a lot more in common with a commercial building than it does with a little bungalow going up somewhere. And you're gonna want that kind of expertise to coordinate among these different pretty complicated systems, because you're asking actually a lot of your building. It's not just like a child would draw the box with the triangle on top. Like you've got more going on.
Right. I know some architects that do that.
Yeah, exactly.
No overhangs either.
None.
Christine, you mentioned that you work with people that kind of and help develop some of these systems and almost develop a catalog. And obviously, going back and reassessing these, I think 3 or 4 episodes ago, we talked about how it wasn't too long ago that we were using just Tyvek and plywood.
Yeah.
And nowadays there's so many self-adhered membranes and, and zip and all of these new products on the market that it's frankly, can be very confusing for the builder and to know what systems,
and the homeowner
Yeah.
What do they know?
But developing this catalog, it's almost like basic building like this SOP. And one of my guys recently was talking to me and it was talking about building something like this. Like, can we just build a book where this is the standard practice on how we flash a window, so everyone's doing it the same way, and how we assemble the interior casing? I love that idea.
Yeah.
There's obviously that's an incredible amount of work, and it will be just collected over time. And how to capture that the best way, I don't know, because that's
video. How do you not know? You're in the business of making content. Like, that was just a crazy statement.
Well, then we need more Doug.
Seriously.
No, I mean, you're right. There's, I guess my thought process is, where do we put that and how do we organize it and how do we capture it as quick as possible? You're right. Video does make sense. But are you working with these people, builders and or architects, and building this catalog and kind of working on a single case scenario, or are you typically working with them per project?
So I used to do it. Well, I used to do both a lot. So coming up with, if you're, say, a developer on the commercial side, if you're a developer and you're doing a bunch of this stuff, those people have a very strong financial interest in coming up with design standards for themselves. So even though a developer will use a lot of different architects, they'll want to give those architects direction for their biggest systems. So, and mostly architects love hearing this, like, because it's determined already. They know what their constraints are going into something. So this is the kind of roof system that we install as a company. This is how we do our plaza decks, our amenity decks. So, like with the pool outside, these buildings are tall and they have like setbacks. And so, these are how our plaza decks are done, and these are how they're waterproofed. This is how we waterproof all of our balconies. And this is how we do our windows. Knowing that in advance, it takes a bunch of decisions off the table in terms of, even just their structural layout and that kind of stuff, like how much each, like the position of balconies relative to the finished floor, that kind of stuff. They know it going in. It's great. It's terrific. But it helps so that's on the commercial side. You're always going to have unique conditions on these buildings. So there's still tons to do. Even if you have sort of a library of design standards, you still have to have somebody reviewing the drawings for individual projects, usually multiple times. But it's great if you're a big developer and you can have these standards, because the standard in and of itself is a risk reduction strategy for you. So you've got a staff and they don't only work on one building, right? You move them around, they work on other projects. So the next one they do, you want to teach them how to install windows again? Because I suppose I should articulate this a little better. Sometimes there's more than one good way of doing something. So even with a developer, if I'm reviewing just one project and I'm looking at a window installation, I can find nothing wrong with the installation that's proposed. But I don't just want nothing to be wrong with it. What I'd also prefer is if this window installation is consistent with what this same developer is doing on their other projects. So like internal consistency is valuable to them as well. So anyway, that's what I do for commercial clients, and that's what have done for commercial clients. I don't really do that because I'm a sole practitioner now, so I don't work with them as much anymore because they should hire someone for each project, and I can't do. Mm-hmm. They're not just doing one a year, right? They're doing dozens, and I can't be one person working on that, and I don't want to be. On residential stuff, there's a lot more customization going on, but I still I prefer to work with architects on this one to come up with the same thing, a handful of standards. Like, this is how we install our windows. These are the water and air control layers that we are most comfortable using, and this is what we use on most of our projects. And most of the time you can kind of set it up with them and then let them run with it. They get the concept, the key details, and you don't always need somebody to review each project. Now that changes, obviously. Some projects are really complicated, so they'll want somebody. I'm working right now on a 17,000 square foot home on the coast, and that's got, there's dozens of just one-off conditions that are completely unique, and they need to be detailed properly, each one. But most homes are not like that. Even very grand houses they're not like that. You make a few of your decisions and you're good.
What about situations like the outside control layer? Whether it's using a self-adhered membrane or using something like a zip panel, and I know we're going to go down a rabbit hole because I have so many technical questions that I hope that you can articulate better.
That's what I'm here for.
Better than what I've read. But things like, I read something the other day that someone was using, it was specified as CDX plywood with a self-adhered membrane because CDX plywood has more vapor transfer or something like that. And I'm like, how am I supposed to know as a builder if I need that or not?
Yeah, that's a big part of my job is usually helping architects with the same thing, but sometimes builders too, where an architect will come up with these standards, right? So they'll come up with, great, this is how we usually do things, and we're good to go. And then they'll get a substitution request, right? Whether it's from an owner or from their builder, right, or from a sub who says, okay, well, we see what you've suggested, but we like to do it this other way. Can we do it this way? And of course, they tell you that that what they're proposing is awesome. Well, how do you interpret that information? Now, some stuff right away, a lot about it, and you're like, yep, that's a lateral move, no problem, have fun. Or maybe it's even an improvement. But the less you know, the more conservative you have to be. Right? So if you are not an expert in something and you don't have somebody that you can really trust to ask, you've got to say no a lot more, and which means that you're closed to oftentimes a lot of really good ideas, or you get kind of pressured into yes, but you're not really sure. So you're like, maybe it's better. We'll see if that's really the case. Or how likely am I going to be to get sued if it goes wrong, or can I blame the person who made the suggestion? Right? You're like, and also most people, we don't like saying no. We want to say yes to stuff, but saying yes means knowing more about these systems, and that's what I help people with. But plywood does. It is more vapor open than OSB, for example, and consequently that makes it when it gets wet, it stays wet for a lot less time. So more drying happens through plywood because it's more vapor open. And plywood also, it starts to degrade and rot. It has to get more wet before it starts to rot than plywood, than OSB. So if you're building for a client or in a place where you really care a lot about that, then yes, that's a very good choice. But most of the time, OSB is just fine, and if for an attentive builder doing a good job, OSB is the standard of sort of typical standard of care. Oh, but for example, on balconies, always suggest plywood on balconies as if it's a wood structure, because of exactly what I've described. Balcony, you've got a life safety issue, and you definitely want to. That's some place where you're going to want to upgrade. But for just the house sheathing,
I guess my question was more towards, and that answers me the technical question. But I guess as a builder, right? When, what is the best way to educate ourselves? And maybe it's working with someone like you, right? But say we don't have that opportunity, choosing, a membrane over a pre-applied like zip, or a liquid applied over that whole surface. What is the best way to come to the table as a knowledgeable builder and really understand it? Like, for instance, dew point. Right, the dew point has to be in a certain place in that wall for it to perform correctly. I wouldn't know how to start to understand that.
Well, I will tell you about dew point, but first I'll answer your other question, which is how do you gain the necessary professional knowledge to feel confident in making a lot of these decisions?
And let me pause you for 1 second.
Sure.
Or am I just overthinking it? Where it's like, no, any of these systems are fine as long as they're installed correctly.
So it's a little bit of both. Like, it's easy to get overwhelmed by building science, or by these types of material science and all the ins and outs of what makes our buildings work. They're really complicated, and that really is true. And we're still only scratching the surface. There's so much more that we can learn about buildings, but that doesn't mean that we can't build great buildings right now. And one of the best resources is our experience and the experience bank of colleagues and people who have come before us. So you already know a lot about something based on your own experience, and you should never discount that. That really matters. When somebody says, I've been doing this sort of joke, right? I've been doing this for 30 years, and I never did that before. That's not the end of a conversation. Just because somebody's done something for 30 years doesn't mean that it's necessarily right. But it means I listen, and we all should. If something's been going on for a while, we have examples. We've got samples to study, real houses. And just to go back to the OSB example, we've been building with OSB successfully for a long time, and we know a lot about what when we see failures, and what are the sort of compounding factors that'll cause a failure. We know what to do. Flash your windows right. Pick a water control membrane. We used to not have water control membranes at all. Which is kind of crazy. But anyway, so definitely trust your experience. And then there's tons of professional development resources available. What's hard now, I think, is figuring out who to trust, right? And you're balancing your own learning style, how much time you have, all kinds of stuff. And it's hard, but it really is hard to know who to trust. And I don't totally have the answer to that, but I evaluate teachers really on whether or not they're able to explain something to me from first principles in a way that I really understand. So when somebody tells me something in this industry, I think, how does that compare to my own experience? How does that compare to what I know about the fundamentals of science, like gravity acts down, the basic stuff, air pressure, air moves from from areas of high pressure to areas of low pressure, the really kind of basic stuff. So how does it compare to my experience? How does it compare to the sort of fundamentals of science? And how does it compare to the experience of my colleagues and my friends? And that's what I use to evaluate a teacher. And then just how well has that person explained it? And fortunately, I think there's a lot of really great resources. The Journal of Light Construction has really great teaching resources, Green Building Advisor, Fine Home Building, podcasts like yours. Instagram has incredible resources, I post little snippets of essentially a lesson, so you're not having to crack a textbook. And then buildingscience.com has a lot of resources too, totally for free. So there actually is a lot out there, but it is hard to kind of devote special time to doing that. It doesn't always seem like, great, now after a long day of work, I'm gonna, I don't know, go through the archives of Fine Home Building or something. So it's sometimes a little hard. That's why I love teaching and learning on Instagram, because it's like you can learn in little 15-minute increments.
But I also think, with all that said, Nick, to be comfortable with what you're learning at that moment and taking 100% ownership of that, and not like, oh, I read that, case study on building science, and then I saw this person on Instagram had used this. You compiling all this information and go, this is the right decision. That's still on your shoulders.
Of course.
So like at some point you have to refine your practices that you're comfortable with, your people. So to go back to the beginning, I don't know when you'll be comfortable with it, until you've 100% ironed out the kinks in what even the people installing it are doing. It's like tile.
Right.
Break it down to tile. It's the same thing of water. Like when you're doing a shower and all that, I freak out about the same thing. Is like, all right, that's above a $200,000 kitchen. Like that's still scary to me. And it's like, I could have all the right pieces, all the weedy, all these different pieces, but if that guy shows up that day, had too many beers the night before or whatever, is my PM gonna know enough to pump the brakes and stop that process until it's gone too far? I think. Yeah. The comfort thing is really scary when you describe a question like that, because I'm like, I've been doing this for 24 years. I'm still not comfortable. Like, depending on who's there, worry.
What's crazy too is like people are really, really, really uncomfortable. Like just as a, I don't know, psychology thing, they're really uncomfortable resting on their own professional judgment for something. It's a lot easier to kind of win an argument by drawing on some other external standard. Like, well, the building code says I have to do it this way.
Right. So
that's like, I get to draw on another standard and I can sort of pass off the responsibility. Well, we have to do it this way. It's code. And that's fine. Like some of that is fine. We have to do some of that.
Well, think about it. Like most building departments want none of the
responsibility.
None of it. So like we're being taught to bring in all these other specialty people to create these affidavits, so then the liability is on them, whether it's structure, whether it's soil, whether it's building science, whether it's HERS rating, airtightness, all this stuff. They're not really walking through the projects. Like they're catching kind of low-hanging fruit. I'm not taking anything away from inspectors that listen to this. I'm just saying that most of the time, you're irrelevant. I should just pass in my paperwork because there's a team of people that are, if something goes wrong and that client decides to sue, they're not suing the building department. They're
suing you.
But they're going to the building department's going to divert that back to whatever affidavit they're holding.
I also feel like this is why people don't change and don't try new things. How many builders use Tyvek and don't do it properly, but it's just like, hey, this is what we do. Our inspectors walk through. Our customers know this. We're not trying to sell them on something that they don't know or we don't know. I think that it takes a special contractor and a customer to be willing to try these new tools and techniques and methods, and to leave work and go home and log on to buildingscience.com to figure out how to execute a certain detail or why you're doing that.
I think that's the challenging thing, is the why. Like why are we using a smart vapor retarder on the inside of the home? Like what is the benefit of doing that? And it's really understanding why, and in what scenario am what I doing going to be, if it's not done 100% right, I'm actually causing more harm than good at this point. And it's there isn't a shortcut around that. Like it's experience and professional judgment, and in professional development and developing judgment. And there isn't a shortcut. We try to make some shortcuts in that. That's essentially what I try to do on Instagram is I take photos from job sites and mark them up and show them to people so that they can get a little bit of experience without having actual experience, right? Maybe they haven't actually seen that on their job, but they see it on someone else's job, and they can hear someone like me talking through it. That's actually how I learned. I would walk. Mostly how I learned is I walk job sites with somebody smarter than me and say, okay, Fiona, who was my first awesome boss in the consulting part of the business. And I'd say, okay, Fiona, I know what I see, but what do you see? So that like internal narrative, that dialogue that's going on in Fiona's head, say it out loud to me.
Yeah.
And
Anyway, that's what I try to do on Instagram for other people, kind of give them a visual, like a virtual site visit, but it's only one thing usually, so it's not like a whole site visit, but one thing, like, okay, when I see this flashing piece, what do I think of that? What's it made out of? What do I think they're going to do next with it? What's the sort of pro and con of doing it? Is there a pro and con in what they've done? Could they have done it a different way? Why do I think they chose such and such? And getting in the habit of doing that, I think helps you learn. But we can have some sort of shortcuts, but mostly you just have to figure it out yourself.
But I think one of the parts that we're missing here is that a lot of people that are in the industry right now, they might be doing these details that you're showing, and they just haven't been in the industry long enough to see them fail yet. To even see them pulled apart, to go, oh my God, I'm doing that. Like, you almost highlight that. That's why I freak out, because so many things change that when you step onto a job site, when you're walking on vacation, and then you kind of find something like, oh my gosh, I have this application happening. Am I doing that right now? And I really get like red in the face watching your stories.
I'm so sorry. I don't want to cause you anxiety.
Well, no, because it's like, oh my, have I been doing it wrong for this long? That's what I anticipate when I watch your stuff. But I mean, the other part is you are the cheat. You are the cheat code to gain. If you don't have the ability to get experience or to wait till it fails, is to hire this individual person like you to kind of help vet that, not solve it, but vet it.
Or just learn from it, like just learn, because I'll tell you stuff for free. But I think also people want to know like where they are in this sort of continuum of risk. So because you can have done a particular something or other, say the way you install your windows, and you know that it's been reasonably successful in that you are reasonably attentive and you haven't gotten sued yet, and customers seem to be pretty happy, and it's generally consistent with what you think is good practice. So you're doing something, and but you don't really know beyond that, or I shouldn't say you don't know. A person has an interest, or a professional has an interest in knowing, okay, well, where does that fit in the scale of risk? Like, how does that compare to how people are doing like super, super low end housing? And how does that compare to how we design laboratories or what we do on, I don't know, Elon Musk's mansion? Like, where am I in that place? How can I bookend these details? Like, and what would I do if I had an extra, if I wanted to spend 10% more in my budget? Where would that be in my window installation or my window? Where would that be best spent? What should I consider upgrading? And what additional incremental performance benefit can I get from that? And that's what I like to try to help people figure out, or help place themselves on that continuum. Even if you're looking at a detail that you don't do, it's nice to know how someone else does it, what decisions go into their choice, even if you'll never do it. It helps you locate your own thing, whatever it is, on that continuum of really, really risky and really safe.
You know, the scary part about social media being one of the driving educational platforms is that no one shows the failures. Like all these people I'm watching right now that are tagging all these different products and all this stuff, that you will never, besides Nick, show that screw up. I mean, Nick, I'm praising you, meaning you definitely, things happen and we all know they do, but a lot of these people are out there to try and gain followers and gain this popularity contest that really doesn't exist. And they won't show that this whatever detail they did, that they devoted all this video content to and all this stuff, all these angles and all these photos, that a year down the line when the client calls, they will never show that part of it. So
yeah.
It's really false in a lot of ways that, you know, people, other kids, younger people are using this platform to educate themselves. And I get that. It's just, it's not all true. Like to have to lean on people like you is what they should be doing.
Well, and like anything else, you've got to really be able to vet who are you picking to trust with this stuff, and what kind of can you trust them, and what kind of case are they making? I make mistakes too.
Yeah, but how hard is it on social media right now to really vet somebody? I'm looking at people all over social media that have great video content that, like, how long have you been in the business for? Like, and then true. I also know backstories on a lot of people that's like, dude, no one wants to do business with them. Like, you have a great face for TV, but it's the fact that you want this, but yet it's the reality of what is on the ground from different subs that we know and all this stuff is that it's not really how you're, what was it? You're not promoting, but what we talked about the other day, Nick, on you're projecting what you want to be.
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
So many people are doing that it's really tough. I see it, but I have to lean on my years and the experience, but I don't know how someone getting into this. That's why I freak out when I meet people and they go, yeah, I've been a laborer. I'm going to go off on my own soon. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, I love that on your website, you're like, being an apprentice was like how you learned. And I really do think a lot of architects, everyone like that should do that. Should visit job sites, see how it's getting made first before they start drawing it and trying to understand it that way. Because understanding how it's drawn together and how it actually gets put together are two different universes.
You know, the big way that major way that I sort of faked myself through Instagram for a little while. I will reveal the secret here, but you're right. People are not showing the whole story. So I spent a really healthy portion of the past year unemployed, which you would never know on my Instagram.
See?
Completely unemployed. And I was unemployed because I'm an immigrant and I was applying for a green card, and I couldn't work for a long time, actually. It was like 6 months. And but I had time to do Instagram, but the stuff I was posting, either they were from old projects or they weren't my projects. And I mean, I wasn't lying. I definitely was not lying. I didn't represent something as my work when it wasn't my work.
Not lying.
Not lying.
I mean, half the time you weren't promoting anyone's work. You were just eyeballing a problem that you wanted, that if you were to have a suggestion involved in that situation, you would have added these couple lines of information.
and I still do that, but it's to your point though, it's a lot of this content gets produced by people who don't have skin in the game.
Correct.
Right.
And are people disclosing what their role really is on these jobs and what the rest of the context is, and that stuff, sometimes it matters, sometimes it doesn't matter. The stuff I was presenting, I don't think that I would have, I'm responsible enough that I wouldn't have posted something where I didn't have enough information to really comment on it. At least I hope. So maybe someone can scroll through and see if they agree with my assessment. But yeah, there's a lot of, and everybody does it to a certain extent, right? You're presenting things in a certain way when it's public it's out there for the public. Do you know that I filter construction photos, which is ludicrous to me, but whatever, it's a brand new.
You're not the only one.
I mean, I think it's hilarious, like, because I'm not showing finished houses, so it's like under construction. But anyway, whatever.
It's like kind of the contrast on that 2x4.
I do it every time. Brighten it up.
Yeah, I mean, right? No, it cracks me up. It really cracks me up that I do this. But people are visual learners, and it's nice to make things look pretty. We care.
But let's be honest. I mean,
I teach a lot of architects, so.
But Nick, you and I, professional photos, like stuff you see in magazines, everyone, half that stuff isn't real. Like I learned that decades ago that like I remember I did a photo that was in Boston Home, and they literally put flowers on the table that didn't exist, and they took away all the appliances that were on there. And I was like, I saw the photo and I was like, I was there for that photo. Like, when did they do that? And they removed it. Like, people removed recessed lights.
I was just going to say, I posted the photo last week, and it was the before photo of Backsplash and then the final. And someone commented, it was like, oh, did you guys decide to get rid of all the recessed lighting? Yeah. And I was like, probably not supposed to let you know this, but they delete it so your eye isn't attracted to the ceiling.
Yeah. That is I did not know that.
Oh, yeah.
That's awesome.
Like when every magazine you see, none of it.
No lights
there. You just ruined this for me.
I know. Outlets, switch plates, like they're not doing a good job laying them out. They're deleting them.
No, exactly. They just don't exist.
You ruined so much right there.
I know.
Oh.
And I posted it, and I was like, man, and I tagged the photographer, and she's gonna look at that and be like, yeah, you're not supposed to tell people that. But
on one of the herringbone backsplashes I did, my photographer tried to Photoshop out the outlet, and she completely screwed up the tile pattern. And that's how I knew. I mean, like, I knew that she did it, but I was like, if you're gonna Photoshop that out, we at least have to have this pattern carry through.
Oh man,
that's awesome.
But with respect to the job site, I mean, you alluded to it, but you would job site crash. And we've talked about this offline, but...
Yeah, I don't do that anymore.
Oh, okay. Why?
I can't.
Why?
Because the account is too big now. And it's... Okay, so for people who don't know, I'll describe what I used to do. Now, first of all, I used to do this anyway, apart from Instagram, just for my own interests. And
I do it. I do it now.
Exactly. Like, when you're in the construction industry and you're wanting to learn and better yourself, it's helpful to look at... You gain experience by looking at other people's work too, and trying to figure out, okay, look how they're framing that. That's a little different than I'm used to. I wonder why they're doing it that way. And there are huge benefits in doing this when you travel too, because there's regional differences in like sequence of work. So, for example, it's really common in most of the country to have your water control functions done by one trade. Usually this often the same trade that ends up installing the windows, or it doesn't have to be, but somebody's installing. If it's Tyvek, somebody's doing that installation, and they're detailing it everywhere on the building that there's Tyvek. That's what they do. In other parts of the country, the water control function is handled by the trade person who's installing the cladding at that part of the building. So if you've got brick on one part of your building, your mason will install the building paper, whatever it is. If you've got stucco on another part of the building and siding on another part, your siding contractor. So, I mean, stuff like that. You learn that from watching other people build stuff. Anyway, so I do this all the time. I stop by other job sites, and especially if they're open and not fenced, I'll walk around. I don't do this on active. I don't do it on active job sites because it's not safe, right? But I use usually I don't have a hard hat that when I'm doing this, if this is just in the open, but people get very uptight when they see you without PPE on a construction site, even if it's a Sunday and it's closed down, but whatever. So I would do this before, and I would take little Instagram videos and film and teach people about whatever it was I'm seeing. So I'm looking at a window flashing and describing, okay, this window is a flanged window, but it has a snap-in flange. and this is what the snap looks like, and here's what you should pay attention to, and that kind of stuff. And it was a great teaching tool, and people loved it. But every time I did it, other people would be like, where's your hard hat, or you're trespassing, which I was not. I checked the law in the state of Texas. I was not trespassing.
Hold on. What does the law say?
So it's not considered trespassing if you leave when asked to leave, which is good. And it's not considered trespassing if there's
no security fence.
If something has not been fed, and there's no signage saying, so if you have to hop a fence, then you're trespassing. But it's not trespassing to walk up to something that's not fenced and there's no signage saying that you can't go in or whatever. So that's not trespassing. Now, even though I wasn't breaking the law, when the account got bigger, I thought, well, I also want to promote good job site etiquette, and
this was prior to you being a citizen, right? So you didn't have to worry
also
about
prior
anything?
to being a citizen. Yeah. Well, I'm still not a citizen. Actually, everything, because of coronavirus, everything's on hold. So who knows? And they're not holding interviews anymore. So I have provisional permission to work and to stay here, but I don't have a green card yet. So
then you can go into whatever sites you want.
Yeah.
I know, right? But anyway, so that's I
think you have more rights than us.
maybe but people would on Instagram would get really uptight about it, and
I could just imagine. I used to repost your stuff and people would give me shade.
You would get yeah
because they're like, you know what, you shouldn't be promoting that because she's trespassing. And I'm like, whoa, hold your horses. I do this every day. I flash like my tape measure like it's a badge, and I just walk on like, yeah, what's going on? You see my tool belt?
Yeah, there you go.
I get on.
Yeah, I carry my hard hat in my car, so I'll do that sometimes. But sometimes if there's a job trailer, I'll go and I'll knock on it, especially for a bigger, and I'll ask. And a lot of times, whoever is there will take me on a tour. People are pretty interested in help. I mean, we're kind of a club, right? People want to help each other out. So if you're genuinely wanting to learn about something and somebody's got the time, say, would you mind walking this job with me? I'm interested in how you've done such and such. And they're like, sure, take a look.
But it's even cooler that most people, a lot of the industry isn't on social. Yeah. So when you meet them and go, hey, can you walk me through the site? They haven't been able to tell anybody about that job site in particular.
Yeah.
At all. And so it's like, I say it to my subs, I'm like Skinny Jeans Pauly, he does amazing reclaim work. And I'm like, dude, it shouldn't be you, me, and the client that understands what you do. Like, give someone else the ability to see into this window of what amazing stuff you do. That's why I think it's funny. Like, I tell my guys, I'm like, hit a job site. If you like that job site and you're kind of amazed by what's happening, whether it's the progress, the details, whatever it is, stop in there and just go, hey, I want to pick your brain about a couple things I've been watching for the last 6 months. That's usually always received as a compliment.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the point too is my goal is to teach and to help people get better and feel more confident about their professional practice. My goal isn't to embarrass people or even to accumulate a large following. It's not based on this sort of shock value of, could you look at how stupid these people over here were? That is never my goal. It's, okay, what's going on over here, and is there something valuable that other people might be able to gain from this? Like, here's something that's kind of risky, but it's really, really common. And here's why I think that it's risky, and here's where it's common and why I think it's common. Well, that's helpful information. The point isn't to embarrass whoever it was. Now, that's the second thing too, is I'm pretty careful about not kind of zooming in on stuff and not identifying, because I don't want to embarrass people. Now I've recently had a little bit of trouble with because I genuinely do not want to embarrass people, but I also genuinely want to teach. And I've had to go back and kind of delete some of the locations for some of my posts, because I'll take a photo from the street and people know, like, if you're in Boston, your neighborhood, your city, you can see something, you can recognize.
That used to
certain
freak me out
buildings.
too. I'm like, please don't walk down the street that we have a job. Don't do that.
I'd be too impressed. You'd be flattered, I'm sure. But the
Christine's out front, just taking. John's like, no,
no.
Go down the street.
Now, if somebody anyway, yeah. So I don't. Somebody did recognize their project in it, and I was critical of the project, and they asked me to take it down, and I refused.
Like seriously, that's free education. Like that was it.
Well, and that's what's interesting. I felt terrible about it because I really felt bad because I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, and I specifically don't want it to be personal. It's on Instagram. It's sort of anonymous. I felt awful, but then I thought a little bit more about it and was like, well, this guy's objecting to criticism, which I understand. I don't like receiving criticism either. I especially don't like it when it's public, but I didn't identify him. I didn't embarrass him or question his specific expertise or whatever. I was critical of a particular practice. In this case, it was not sufficiently draining stucco. So it was like a really super modern facade, no overhangs, and just one layer of building paper behind stucco over.
Am I the only one that's like filtering through the people that I know? All right, so it's a guy.
Ask what
modern.
it was.
Like, give me one or two more details, and I'm gonna be able to filter this down to a handful of people.
It's no, you wouldn't know that.
No, I'm just joking.
There's tons of builders, but no, it wasn't anybody I knew personally. But it was somebody who recognized somebody I knew. I'm sure sent it to this guy and was like, "Isn't this your building?" But rather than evaluate the content of my criticism, it was like I did him a favor. This is because
Imagine if the owner had been a friend of the owner caught your post, and then that went to the owner. Then the owner would go back to the builder and be like, "Yo, what's going on with this?" So it's almost like an eye opener. And
I hate putting people in that position, which is why I try to make it more anonymous than that now, and I'm more careful because now my account's a lot bigger and people are a lot more likely to recognize stuff. So I try now not to say the city, I'll say just the climate zone, for example, because it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter. Like, I don't want to embarrass a specific person. The goal is to teach people and give them a frame of reference. It's not.
Where are you going on vacation? I might go to zone 3.
I'm going to zone 6.
Exactly.
I just love how she thinks.
That's right. But anyway, yeah, people are such busybodies about stuff. They're really anyway.
So I gotta ask, did he correct it?
No, I don't think, not to my knowledge. I don't think so. He was really angry, and maybe I hope he doesn't listen to this and decide he wants to sue me. Not because he would prevail, because
you're unemployed. There's nothing to get.
That's right. There's nothing to get. I'm employed now, but there's nothing to get, and also like I'm right. So there's I'm correct. I'm so right on this that it's, and also building is public. It's an inherently public thing that we do. And it's, part of my job is to be a critic. And it's like you go to a restaurant and nobody complains if the food critic doesn't like what he or she ate. Like that's sort of part of the game. Like sorry, it doesn't mean that the chef was a bad person. Nobody's bad in that. It's just that's their role. That's the role. The critic's role is to be a critic. And so I'm a critic and an educator, and my job is to teach. And sometimes I feel so bad because I hate doing that. But I like for people to feel good about themselves and good about their jobs. But I don't like
spooky.
when I hurt people's feelings.
Like there's a project going up around me, and I do keep tabs on like almost every build that's in my area. And same as you, like there's a decent following that follows me right from that area. Like the other day I was playing hockey when I shouldn't be playing hockey at night, and someone forwarded the photo from my story to the owner of the rink. I was like, "You guys are open?" Like it's still amazing how small of a world it is. But like there's a building that went up, and like in Wellesley there's an issue where they've created this kind of bubble you have to work within. Meaning, if a garage counts as just usable square footage for your overall lot coverage, and then anything over 5 feet in the attic counts as your square footage as living space. So everyone's doing these squatty roofs, and usually a lot of gambrels. If you're good at what you do, you can kind of squeak it in that way. And I'm driving by this house, and I'm watching it get built, and I see it get framed. Obviously, it's all in plywood, so I'm like, that's cool, whatever. And then I'm looking at the roof of the gambrel, and it's got to be like a 2-pitch, 3-pitch. And I'm like, my immediate thing is like, I'm driving the corner. I'm like, oh, so they're going to do all tin everywhere. I'm like, that's expensive. Like just keeping this running tab of what's happening, And I do the same thing. I didn't like show that on my video because realtors, everyone else could see that and know exactly what house it is. But like I'll pop into like an open site that's dug to be like, all right, what's the soil conditions here?
Yeah,
if I ever get a house here, am I going to get screwed? Should I put ledge in right away? So now I watch this build, and then I watch it some more, and then I go by like the next day, and I swear to God, like I turned the corner and I like yelled out loud. I was like, oh my God, no. And it's like all asphalt. And I was like, I didn't even get to see if they put ice and water. Like, what happened? Like, what's the, what, like, then I'm like, do I go on the site and see what shingles those are? Because I'm like, I'm pretty sure last time I looked at it, these shingles only rated for like a 4-pitch and above. And I'm like, that's a 3-pitch. I'm like, I'm literally panicking as I drive by this house because I'm like, what are they going to do? And in my head, it's like, they don't really care. They're just kind of hammering out. Like they planted trees the other day. I'm like, they don't even have a water service. How are they watering those trees? Like those trees are gonna die. What's the lifetime on those trees right now? Who's warrantying that? But like same as you, I drive around and keep track of. I'm like, that's funky. I wonder if that's gonna fail. I'll be in the same neighborhood for the next 10 years, so I'll watch if it fails or not.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But you kind of keep tabs.
And that's part of what makes this fun. I mean, that's fun. I mean, I guess it depends on your definition of fun, but that meets my definition of fun.
It's exciting, but then I'm like, who's going to buy that house? I'm like, oh, do you let them know?
John, we talked about one a couple weeks ago, like the one I walked about, it was a possible takeover project. And it was just, there were so many things wrong, even starting with the aesthetics and the products that they use.
Obvious things.
Like very obvious. You walk on the site and it was immediate. And then walking around the home, seeing to the level of finish that the home is, they don't have mechanicals. The home is not acclimated. There's hardwood throughout. There's trim through, and it was going down this rabbit hole to a point where
first off, like you couldn't even drive up to that house because the driveway wasn't done. Like just general thought process.
Yeah,
like how do you get in?
It was so, it was terrible. And at the end of the day, the conversation was, yes, this is how we can fix it. This is roughly how much it's going to cost. This is our suggestion, blah, 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 blah. But realizing that no matter what happened, someone was going to finish that house.
Someone's going to buy it.
Make it look beautiful.
Yeah.
And someone was going to buy it. And to know that, like John said, it's like, who's going to end up with that? And why doesn't someone care? And this wasn't a cheap house. This was multi-million-dollar home.
Yeah.
And it's, and that's what's frustrating to me. And I can only imagine how frustrating it is to you, like this guy that is mad at you for pointing out a detail where, your immediate reaction is you kind of feel bad for calling him out. And then you...
Yeah, but somebody's going to buy that. And not only is somebody going to buy it, houses are the worst in what you're describing because most of the time that's somebody's most valuable asset.
Yep.
They've worked their ass off for it.
It's their primary vehicle for savings.
Yep.
That's their thing. And they can lose and that's what made me feel better about not taking that particular post down because the error, this wasn't like you didn't flash your window right. So the recourse is that you have to one day reinstall your windows when you figure out that there's an issue or one of your windows or whatever. This was you're not sufficiently draining your stucco in a climate where it sometimes rains 60 inches per year. You're going to rot your sheathing. Right. You're going to end up with mold in your walls. Your insulation is going to be saturated. And to reclad and resheathe your house, you could lose, that could be $200,000. You could lose all of the equity in your house for that.
And even let's talk about it from a technical standpoint. That failure is probably not going to shed light until it's too far.
Until it's too late.
And then all of a sudden Christine comes out and does a little inspection hole.
Yeah, exactly. It might be a second owner.
You're the second owner, and the way that particular problem, the way they find out usually is there's some other problem.
Mm-hmm.
So they investigate. One of the windows does start to leak, and they start looking. They're like, oh shoot, I guess we got to fix this window, and they go to investigate that window, and then they find the entire elevation is rotten. Or they go, I've had with the same issue, some stuff starts to smell because the insulation is getting saturated, and now it smells where it used to be sort of a little musty, and now it's starting to smell bad. Or they'll install cabinetry on the interior of something, and the cabinetry starts to smell bad, or around the cabinetry, which is really the insulation in the wall, and then they'll open it up and be like, oh boy, this is really bad. And it's so bad, like the sheathing is so wet, it comes apart in your hands. Like
right.
The owner can tell this is not what it's supposed to look like. It's not like you have to hire a professional to tell you you've got a problem. They know. Or the base boards will start getting all gross and wonky. So they usually they think they have a water leak, but they don't. I mean, they do sort of. It's just the whole thing is rotten.
You made a reference earlier that one of your goals is to do this in a cost-effective manner and set up cost-effective practices, which I think a lot of times is one of the arguments where builders are like, yeah, that's just too costly. We're just going to do what we typically do. And I think that's hugely important, right? I think it's important to understand how a system works and to John's point, be comfortable with it, whatever that system is. Mm-hmm. Whether it's liquid applied, a membrane, or an all-in-one sheathing with tape. It doesn't matter what it is. It's being comfortable with it, understanding best practices with it, but also to your point, like knowing that there's a cost-effective way to do this correctly, that you don't have to be overly educated in it.
No, and actually with a lot of stuff, it's like the design matters more than the product that you're using or products that you're using. So in that particular example, what we're really talking about is drainage behind your cladding.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a cladding that is drained and back vented, you have already reduced. That's the single easiest way to reduce risk on your building.
So let me ask you this: why wouldn't you have a cladding that is drainable or is drained?
Because you don't know, or because you. So the stucco is the one that. Stucco and adhered stone, you have to actually specify a drainage mat to get more drainage, and that's an ad, and that's different, and maybe you don't know. But some claddings just naturally have drainage and back venting behind them, like brick, right? So there's a brick cavity. Now you got to keep it clear, and if the cavity is only 1 inch, you might also want drainage mat, because it's really hard to keep a 1 inch cavity behind brick clear of mortar dropping, so that it actually is a spot where drainage can in fact actually occur. But siding can be installed on furring strips, or I like to run sill seal vertically on and use sill seal as furring, because it's so inexpensive, and it gives you about just about 1/8 of an inch or a little more for drainage, which is great. It's all you need. You don't need a lot. It needs to be there. But those decisions, whether or not you have drainage and drawing in front of your water control layer, whatever it is a lot more important than what you pick as your water control layer. You want to use a mechanically attached membrane? Fine. You want to use zip? Great. Also a good choice. You want to use a fluid applied membrane or self-adhered membrane? Knock yourselves out. In all cases, the drainage that is in front of it matters substantially more than whatever it is you're using.
And that's why, like Steve Baczek and Kyle had mentioned on their episode, is that they focus on water first.
Yes,
water management.
Yeah.
You start with that. So
yes.
We're through siding. We're using a sill seal against some sort of water protection membrane. I'm walking through your wall assembly right now, Christine. So now we're at the point of sheathing and water in that membrane or whatever we're using there. Talk to me about, vapor permeable. Like, why does that matter? I look at Matt Reisinger. He's alumiflashing his entire
Yeah,
home.
you don't want to do that. You don't want to do that in Boston.
Right, and it's okay,
Yeah.
but why? Because
Okay.
I'm looking at it. It's like, why not? And I think a lot of people look at this as,
It's cool, man. I want to do it. I want to be
yeah,
just like
it looks like a
Matt.
big spaceship.
Do it because Matt does it. Yeah. No, so, okay. So you actually, this comes into, I'm going to answer the question you asked earlier, which was about dew points. Because I'm going to do that now.
Okay.
You'll see why. I think
You don't
I
have to
think it's
answer any
helpful.
of our questions.
That's amazing. She held on to that for this long.
I did because it's because I care. So I find dew point to be a really confusing concept. It's
Thank
hard
you.
to teach people with that. People get really upset, or they obsess over it, and they think that they're missing something in their wall assembly. It's very hard to understand, and it ties them in knots, and I don't think it's very productive. So while I acknowledge that it is an actual engineering term, so I don't want to say that it's not useful, but for most practical purposes, it's not a very useful way of thinking of your wall. So to take a step back from dew point, let's talk about water and air. We know, intuitively why you need a water control layer in your wall assembly. You're building with moisture sensitive materials, and you want to make sure that they don't get wet from rain or from groundwater, right? So you've got to protect moisture sensitive things from excess wetting. You get that. Air control layer, also fairly intuitive. We want to, when we build a building, we want to keep the inside air in and the outside air out. We want to create a certain set of environmental conditions within our enclosure, and that's separate from whatever is going on in the outside. And in order to do that, we need to actually enclose that space so that we can condition it properly. And air sealing has all kinds of other benefits that come pretty intuitively to us. If you air seal, you keep dust out, keep allergens out, that kind of stuff. So it's pretty easy and relatively straightforward to understand what it is our water control layer does and where it should generally be put, and what it is our air control layer does and generally where to put it. Vapor is different in that, for the most part, we don't care about keeping vapor out of our house from just sort of wafting through the enclosure. It's not a comfort issue, right? Like, you don't really, we perceive relative humidity, it changes. So if you live in a home that's has a high relative humidity, or a building, you'll know, right? You'll know if it's humidified. But our mechanical system handles that, right? So our mechanical system ends up humidifying, dehumidifying, whatever, as necessary. When we talk about vapor control in walls, we're not talking about comfort. We are talking about durability. So the only reason that we care about vapor is because we don't want to damage the materials that we're building with. So it's not a comfort issue. It's just, let's focus on the durability of the materials. And to that end, it's not really vapor that we really care about from a practical perspective in dealing with walls. What we care about is condensation. So what we're trying to do is control
I
condensation.
got it right in my head.
You got it.
Yes. I was like,
I want to pause you for 1 second.
Mm-hmm.
So to try to simplify, water we're trying to keep out of our home.
Yep.
Air we're trying to keep the outside out, the inside in.
You got it.
Vapor is now in between, in this wall cavity of susceptible materials that can be damaged by this. So
Right.
now within
All we're
this
trying
wall
to do
cavity,
is
we need to manage that.
All we're trying to do is not screw up. All we're trying to do is not do something that's going to cause some material to get wet and not be able to dry out. All we want to do is not screw up with vapor.
And condensation is typically caused by something, a drastic change in temperature and the thermal transfer of it.
So here's where, first I want to set the stage to say that the only reason that we care about vapor at all, unlike water and unlike air that have comfort benefits, the only reason we care about vapor is for durability of our building materials itself. Now, what gets us in trouble is condensation. And in order to have condensation, we have to have from a practical perspective, we have to have two things. We need a cold surface, and we need usually air. We need moisture of some sort, and it's usually moisture that's in the air to hit the cold surface. So we have to have both of those things. So we have to have a cold surface and some way for moisture to get to that cold surface. So think about cold beer, warm day, you get condensation. That's what it is. So in principle, though, if we're thinking about cold beer, warm day, we only have a few ways of limiting condensation. One way is to not have a cold surface. If the beer isn't cold, if it's warm, you don't get condensation on the beer, or on the glass. I guess you're not getting it on the beer, but no cold surface, no condensation. The second way of stopping condensation from occurring is preventing air from reaching that surface.
A koozie.
There you go. Or somehow putting the beer in a vacuum or whatever.
Would a koozie be more of like a thermal barrier, like your thermal break?
It kind of is. So maybe my beer is a bad example.
No, I like it. It makes people can all listen to this and understand that. I just think the koozie part is if you thermally broke the outside of your house, right? Because then it's not the hot air that's inside. Let's say it's cold. It's in our climate. The hot air inside's not hitting that cold surface.
Correct. So, but both of just think in general, cold surface. So my choices are I can make the surface warm, or I can stop air from touching that surface. Now, it is almost always easier to stop air or to keep, when we're dealing with condensation in a building, it's almost always easier to deal with the surfaces, because it's very hard to control air, right? Like air gets all kinds of places. So, anyway, so it's almost always easier to control the temperature of the surface. So when we're thinking about a wall, what are the surfaces that are the kind of biggest concerns for condensation? They are our exterior sheathing and our interior drywall. Those are the two surfaces that are the kind of ones that we need to pay attention to. And I say this also because this stuff seems really overwhelming to a lot of people. They're like, I got a lot of surfaces. You only really, like, where's the dew point? Screw the dew point. You don't need to think about the dew point. Think about these two surfaces.
Right.
And are they ever going to be cold? And the answer is yes. In the wintertime, our surface, our exterior sheathing is going to be really cold. So how cold is it going to be, and how long are we going to have the potential for condensation, and do we have any way of controlling that? Now, in a warm climate, so let's go to Matt Reisinger's climate with his polywall, the foil-faced self-adhered membrane that he's using on his sheathing. In a warm climate, we have winter, but it never really gets cold enough that his nice warm interior air wafts through the wall, goes through the drywall, goes through the insulation, and hits the backside of the sheathing. That sheathing's going to be cold, but it's not going to be cold enough for long enough to really cause a problem. So we're fine. No big deal in the South. But now let's take Matt Reisinger's house and move it up to Boston, same assembly. With the foil-faced self-adhered membrane on the exterior sheathing. Same nice warm air, interior air goes through the drywall, through the fiberglass bat insulation, and hits the backside of the sheathing. And now it is cold enough and stays cold for long enough. So you'll get a little bit of condensation there. And if with the foil facing on the face of that sheathing, we can only get drying to the interior. It can't dry to the exterior. So now the sheathing not only do we get water there, it stays wet longer because we've inhibited how much it can dry. So if you had a vapor open water and air control layer, suppose you're using ZIP, which is a little bit more vapor open, or suppose you're using Tyvek, or suppose you're using a self-adhered membrane that was vapor open. Most of these manufacturers make a VP version of whatever their membrane is. Well, then you lower the risk of condensation, or you don't really lower the risk of condensation. You still get condensation at that surface, but it doesn't stay wet for long enough to cause you a problem.
So it's allowing the vapor to transfer through the plywood out to the outside.
Which is another way of saying it's allowing it to dry.
Yeah.
So
you have a condensing surface, but it doesn't stay, it's not cold enough for long enough.
So 2 questions to that point.
To have a problem.
How are you then determining how vapor open you want your membrane to be? Experience.
So, okay. and we know from this you don't need to do a calculation to figure this out. We know that a 2x4 wall with a fully adhered vapor open membrane and cavity insulation in a cold climate will work okay. Now, we're a little risky if we're in a cold climate, and the best way of reducing that risk is not by trying to install an interior smart membrane, vapor, air and vapor control layer on the inside, because it's really hard to do that. The best way of reducing the risk is by putting insulation on the outside. Mm-hmm. And what are we doing with the insulation? We are not changing the vapor profile of this house. We're just warming that surface up. And the colder the climate is, the more insulation you need on the outside to keep the surface warm enough for us to be, quote unquote, in the clear.
My second question to that point is what is the benefit of using the Alumaflash in the hot climate? Why not just use something that's vapor open?
Looks cool.
Because it looks cool. No, it's because they sponsor him, obviously. No. So I kid. They probably do, but they should. He's awesome. Everybody should give everybody who does this lots more money.
Don't backpedal here.
No, give money. But no. So the foil-faced self-adhered membranes are really great because they have excellent UV protection. So if you are working on a house that is complicated, especially a lot of these, 17,000 square foot beasts that I'm describing, if they've got complicated masonry on them or whatever, and you have reason to believe that this is going to be your construction period is going to be longer than these aluminum-faced, these foil-faced membranes are really, really durable, and they're a great choice for those types of projects. There's nothing wrong with, you can absolutely use
so using a vapor closed product, you're basically lengthening the time it can be exposed to the elements.
Oh, no, that's just the fact that it's foil. So the foil facing is UV resistant. If you had something that was UV resistant, that was vapor open, that would be a better choice, in my opinion. Okay. It just happens that a lot of things that are UV resistant are more vapor closed. Gotcha. Now he can safely use that in his climate because it's no big deal. So sure. He gets the UV protection, and he doesn't really take a performance hit because he doesn't need that feature. And I think it's kind of a nice feature to have. I like assemblies that dry in both directions. They tend to be more forgiving of construction defects, all that other stuff. But it's certainly not a problem to do what he's doing in a southern climate. In a northern climate, he could also use, anybody could use a foil face or vapor closed water and air control membrane if you were using enough exterior insulation to make the point moot. And you make it moot by not having your condensing surface is not cold enough.
And
your possible condensing surface isn't cold enough.
So, and I'm sure the answer is experience, but how are you then understanding or planning for how much exterior insulation is required?
Okay, so excellent
follow-up
question. How much? How do we know that we're okay?
On each surface.
What's that?
On each surface.
On each surface. We can talk about the summertime condition next if you want to go into it. But how we know we're okay is conveniently in a chart. I always Google this because I work in a lot of climate zones and I have a bad memory. So I end up Googling an article written by my dad called Hybrid Assemblies, but this is also in the building code. It's in the section on attics, weirdly, of the building code. But the article on hybrid assemblies has a chart in the back, towards the end of it, and the chart says what percentage of the wall's total R value needs to be on the outside by climate zone to be safe. And it has it for roofs and it has it for walls. And the reason the number is a little different for roofs than it is for walls is because roofs have a totally vapor impermeable membrane on them because they need to.
Yeah.
So we have no exterior drying on a roof, which means that the percentages are a little higher for roofs than they are for walls, because walls we typically get a little bit more drying. So this is in the building code, but it's sort of an easier way to access. So I just always Google Building Science Corporation hybrid assemblies, and I pull up the chart. I should probably post just the chart on my website so that everybody can have it. But no, I should plug the article. But anyway, it varies by climate zone, and these are recommendations to kind of reduce your risk. The building code. Now I mentioned like 2x4 walls. Well, we build 2x6 walls now, and there's more insulation, cavity insulation in those walls, which means there's less drying. So you raise the stakes a little bit as there as well. You put more insulation in the cavity. When we use insulation, something gets warmer, the inside, but something also gets colder, and that's the sheathing, or whatever's outside of the insulation gets colder. So we have to, when we change something, we might need to make other adjustments to make sure that what we're doing is still safe. So with using more of these 2x6 walls in cold climates, I think a lot of people, it's worth considering using exterior insulation in addition to that. And certainly, this is for houses, but certainly this is absolutely mandatory if you're building some sort of special use building that's like humidified or whatever. So if you've got extra humidity on the inside, you've got to keep that sheathing warm enough. And actually, that's a good example of we can try to control air and vapor on the inside of our assemblies by using a vapor barrier, which you should never do, or a vapor retarder, such as the Intello, I think, that you guys use. You put that, and that does a reasonably good job, but it's only as good as the detailing, and it's very difficult to detail that well enough to avoid a condensation problem.
Right.
And you cannot, so you can do it, and we can be reasonably successful at detailing that on residential projects that are well designed and have really attentive installers. It would be egregious for you to do that approach commercially. It's too complicated. You cannot. That it's not reliable enough to control. We cannot be good enough at doing that in a commercial project or for a humidified project. So if you had a pool or like a hospital operating room or whatever, it would be. Yeah. Don't do that. So back when I said condensation, you need a cold surface and you need moisture to reach that surface. It is always, always, always easier to control the temperature of the surface than it is to stop moisture from reaching the surface.
Yeah, so I did that underground sport court, and I freaked out because you're introducing, sweat and all that humidity during the process.
Yep.
That you can't plan for. Like, it's not like it's happening during a season. It's literally whenever you get 10 people together in a room for 2 hours.
Yeah.
So it was like, how do we, like, the craziest part was no one had answers. Okay, I ended up bringing in Tathui. That's who ended up doing like our design on all that.
Wait, who did? Sorry, you cut it.
Tathui.
Ross.
Right?
Ross Tathui.
Yeah.
Oh,
With
So he was doing kind of our overall
the
systems.
plumber on this old house?
Oh, yeah.
It's his son.
Ah, that's great.
Sorry. Yeah, so he does, I couldn't remember the name of the company. I was hoping Nick would help me out there.
T2.
Ah, okay.
And he would, because our HVAC company that came in, they were just your basic, they were designing a system. And then I was like, what are we doing about the humidity that we're going to have during these off times? that we can't, is there a remote? What are we going to do? And then they didn't have the answer. So as the GC, it was like, they need to find somebody that's going to get me the right answer for this. And it's going to be planned for.
You know what I get that on the most is wine rooms.
Yeah.
Like people's wine cellars, because they humidify them and they hire a specialty consultant to deal with the mechanical systems, but it's not on their radar to figure out what the enclosure is. And that's, when I'm helping people do design reviews or doing design reviews for their projects, that's a huge one, because everybody wants fancy wine rooms. And
if you have customers like Nick, you can just buy them in a circle and they get dropped into the kitchen. You don't have to worry about any of that.
There you go.
They have some funky mechanical. Christine, I pulled up that chart. So I'm looking at climate zone 5.
Yep.
And then it says code required R value R49. And then rigid board or air impermeable insulation R20. And ratio of rigid board insulation or air impermeable R value to total insulation value should be 40%. So if I read that right, that says that I should have an R20 on the exterior wall.
Are you looking at walls or roofs?
Yeah, I was going to say.
I think you're looking at a roof.
Yep, looking at the roof. Hold on.
And so the reason it's more for the roof is because you get no drying, no upward drying through that roof, unless you've really screwed something.
Let's try this again. So our climate zone 5, total cavity or total wall assembly insulation, we'll use the easy one, R18, and then it says 30% should be on the outside. So that puts R13 on inside the wall, and then an R5 on the exterior of the wall. Mm-hmm. So basically saying that as long as you have an R5 on the exterior of your wall, you can then hit your insulation value with R13 in the cavity, and then you're sufficient enough where your condensation, the location of possible condensation is far enough out that it will dry.
Stop thinking of it that way.
Okay.
I was thinking the same way. That dew point reaction happens in the insulation.
I'm thinking like a little cartoon droplet is like, okay, now I'm over here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Quit thinking about that, because condensation doesn't happen unless you have a surface with enough thermal mass to support it.
So is that
it doesn't just happen in the air?
Is the R5 basically saying that it can't happen?
It's saying that your sheathing is warm enough that it won't.
Yeah, so it's moving.
Okay, yeah. That's what I was trying to ask.
Your beer isn't cold enough.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what I used to freak out about when there was this whole movement of doing the flash and bat on the roof systems. Like this, you do a little bit of closed cell foam, then you fill it with fiberglass, and that was kind of the end all be all for the best bang for your buck for dollar wise. And I used to freak out because even a lot of people rely on the foam companies to know what those values are. They'll go, hey, quote me a flash and bat that works for this area. And they just assume, like even our guys, not currently, but the old company I used to work for, that's what they do. And then our old boss would go, hey, we want to do this. We want to do 2 inches of closed cell and then do the rest in fiberglass. And
you can do that. That's why the article is called hybrid assemblies, because it's what do we do when we're kind of mixing and matching, because exterior insulation and spray foam insulation is expensive. So how can we minimize the expensive stuff and maximize the inexpensive stuff and not have an issue? And what's interesting about that chart, to maybe highlight to listeners, is that what we're paying attention to here is the ratio of it's not the total insulation that we care about, it's the ratio of insulation on either side of the surface that we care about. So if we're talking about our sheathing, what's the ratio of insulation inboard of the sheathing, the cavity insulation, and outboard of the insulation, the exterior insulation? And of course, to minimize cost, what we want to do is we want to minimize how much exterior insulation we have and maximize the cavity insulation without having a problem. But it's the ratio that matters, because the more cavity, if you add more cavity insulation, the temperature of your sheathing goes down. So this is where I had this come up actually in California. I ended up working on a building with like an R105 roof. It was crazy. It was California, and which they didn't need it, right?
R105, is that what you said?
145. And the reason it was so big is
because...
Oh,
in that case, it's fine. I thought it was 105.
It was, yeah, right. So it was a flat roof with the structure was trusses, and but the building was really, really truss span large, which meant that the trusses were really deep. So they wanted to fill the entire truss cap with loose fill, fiberglass batt insulation, which is air can go through that. And the reason they wanted to stuff it full was because the building code required that they either fill that space up with something or they add sprinklers, fire sprinklers.
Jesus. So
it's cheaper to fill this space than it is to add fire sprinklers. But if you fill this giant cavity of insulation, even though the building code only requires you to have an R whatever roof in California, Southern California, I forget what it was, and they only require a certain amount of rigid insulation on top of the roof deck. Well, it doesn't assume that you're going to not just exceed code, but like grossly exceed code minimum. So when you add R 145 to the underside of a roof deck, well, now that roof sheathing is really cold. Like that's a lot more tied to the exterior temperature than it is to the inside. So if we add more insulation, we actually said you can do this to avoid sprinklers, but you're going to have to proportionally add insulation to the top side of the roof deck in order to both comply with the code and to not have an issue. So it's the ratio that matters, not just the absolute factor.
Because having that ratio off, even if you have more exterior insulation, then say you're 50% exterior insulation.
Oh, you can add more to the outside. You just can't add more to the inside.
So if you're adding more to the inside, you're now going back, like you're basically increasing your chances of that condensation happening again?
Correct, because you're making the sheathing temperature colder, not warmer. So any insulation that's outboard of your sheathing gets, the more you have, the warmer that sheathing gets. Mm-hmm. So it's great. Insulation on the inside of your sheathing, the more you have, the colder your sheathing gets, which increases your risk of a problem.
So the percentage is really important on cavity insulation. You could be nothing on the inside and all exterior board.
Exactly. But we typically don't do that because it's really expensive.
Right.
It's not so much the material cost of the insulation, but at a certain point, it becomes really hard to detail your wall if you've got more than 4 inches of insulation on the exterior. And really, it starts to get hard when it's more than 2 inches of exterior insulation. So it's you have to detail your windows really differently. You have to have clad enclosures to conceal the cut edge of the insulation at your windows or any kind of.
You got to figure out if you can have an innie or an outie.
Exactly, and if you want an outie, if you don't want a clad enclosure, if you want your window to be set further to the exterior, well, now structurally, like how do you buck out your window and support it structurally? And all of these are problems that we can solve, but it becomes a lot more. You have to be really careful about designing it and installing it. Whereas if you're just using a little bit of insulation outboard of your sheathing, it's not, you don't have to substantially change your details.
But a lot of people right now, myself included, none of us are doing. I mean, I thermally broke this, but I think about this. I use the Zip R, so my sheathing is still on the outside.
So
and insulation is attached to the studs.
Yeah, it's really, Zip R is a terrific product because it allows you to to comply with the code requirements for exterior insulation without actually having to change all of the detailing to account for having your insulation outboard of your sheathing, of your water and air control layer, right? So what I mean by that is for people who don't know, the Zip R it's an OSB product with a factory applied coating on the outside face of it. This is normal zip. And
does that breathe?
Coating, It does, but only a little bit. I mean, not only a little bit. It's about, the coating is about 12 perms, roughly 10 to 12 perms, something like that, maybe 14.
What do I have to clean out of my head to find room for that calc, like that information?
Oh,
Hey,
I don't.
12 perm. Yeah, because I knew that.
What's so funny is Instagram has made me so much faster at this stuff because people ask me so often. Anyway, whatever. That's why I was sort of surprised, but I could tell when you were quoting the roof section of hybrid assemblies because I just refer to it so much. But anyway, so there's OSB sheathing with a factory applied coating on it, and the coating serves as the water and air control layer. You just tape the seams. So that's regular zip. Zip R, like Robert, has insulation, polyisocyanurate board insulation adhered to the inside face of the interior face of the OSB panel. So it's applied in the factory and it's already stuck. So you have this panel that has OSB and insulation. And when you install it, the insulation faces the interior. So the insulation is outboard of your studs, but it's inboard of the sheathing, which has the water and air control layer on it. Now, what that means is all of your detailing is the same, like your windows, your service penetrations. It is the same as it used to be because it's you're sealing everything to the face of the sheathing, which is super convenient. If your trades aren't used to it, you don't need a new architectural drawing set to accommodate this. It's just minimally disruptive. But you get the insulation on the inside. Now, this is not like, what do we make of the insulation at that level and the temperature of our sheathing? It's inboard of our sheathing, so our sheathing temperature is going to be cold. So do we need to worry about this condition? No, we do not, and I will tell you why. Not a lot of air does not go through polyisocyanurate insulation. So we don't have air wafting through the same way it goes through fiberglass bats or cellulose or whatever. So we don't have air going through it. We do have a little bit of water vapor that goes through it, but not enough to really trouble us. What we care about is the joints. So the joints of the insulation, the insulation is continuous across the panel, but it's discontinuous, joints. You have to join them together. But where do the joints actually happen on the building? They happen at the studs, they happen at the framing, and they're held in compression at the framing. So on a regular building like a house, you don't get sufficient air movement from the nice warm interior through that framing to insulation connection, through the insulation to the back of the sheathing to be an issue. So, which is what makes Zip R such a great choice for a lot of people who don't want to do exterior insulation, or the trade base isn't there or whatever.
Plus you're taping that joint on the outside.
Yeah, you tape it on the outside, but the risk here is from interior air. Our outside air is already cold. So our interior air is nice and warm and has moisture in it. So we don't want that nice warm interior air to hit the inside face of the sheathing, right? And not enough of it will in the configuration that I've just described. But suppose instead of you were building a pool, an interior pool. Well, then I would say not a good choice, because even a very small amount of air leakage through that joint becomes significant enough to really matter. So I wouldn't do it for a special use or a humidified building, but for a house, a regular house, it's great.
So the concern with the insulation behind your water control layer is specifically related to the fact that you can't seal the backside of those joints.
Right. I mean, if you...
John's looking around right now.
If you tried to
leave any
seal
of those
it,
exposed?
No, well, I did. I'm thinking I did closed cell foam on the inside.
Yeah. So the air leakage that you're having, even if you didn't do it, normal buildings don't require you to have to go to the trouble of sealing it. And in fact, if you were doing a pool, closed cell foam wouldn't be reliable enough. Even that wouldn't be reliable enough to that I would ever recommend it. And in fact, not only would I not recommend it, but if somebody else did that, another professional did that, I would call that an irresponsible design choice.
Sure.
Because it's it's too risky. The temperature difference is too big, and the humidity load on the interior is too large to make that a wise choice, even if you had spray foam on the interior that stopped
So to expand on John's question, a lot of guys, I think, I know in our market, but throughout the country, aren't doing exterior insulation at all.
Correct.
And the usual suspect is that they're going with closed cell foam, and that's getting enough R value where condensation's not an issue.
Yep.
Let's remove closed cell from the equation here. And
I wanted to keep going on that because I feel like on the roof, I was doing my bat and flash and bat before, and we went too thin on the flash. So then we actually got condensation in between the closed cell foam and the underside of the fiberglass.
Yep.
I mean, and this is also, I think, the conditions have changed a little bit in New England where we're getting a lot more of these 10-degree days for a lot longer. So that, like, when you're skirting that line, meaning we talked about value on percentage of what you spend on closed cell foam and how much you need to save, we tried to really cut that line super tight. And then when we did that, this is when the season kind of changed and we got a lot of these really, really cold days for a long, significant amount of time. That's when we caught this insulation. It actually dripped onto a return duct and then dripped into the house. It's the only way we caught that, is that it was dripping down onto something else that then we have a leak. It's like, how do we have a leak? It's like not possible. So then once you actually start investigating it, we actually brought our consultant in that did. So we didn't just make this decision based on our boss and then the installation company. We brought in, back in the day, it was CSG, who basically kind of consulted on that process for us and goes, hey, is this okay? As a third party, not like, hey, we're just inventing something, And so we did that with the okay, meaning, Nick, I was comfortable with that because this is what they do for a living. Right. And we kind of shrunk that line really, really tight. Then we got these crazy, crazy cold days. That's the only time. Like, I would go up there every day for the next month, and I'd put my hand behind the insulation and feel it, nothing. And I'm like, what is happening? It was only during the super cold days, that was repetitive days, that we found that this issue happened. So then we made sure is that now I just don't do the flash and bat, just because everything is changing. The world's upside down. Besides COVID, it's just, so how do we do this? So now we do 5.5 inches of closed cell foam on the roof. That's our minimum standard for roof lines.
So you're exactly right with this. If you want to know how much closed cell insulation, you can consider, for the purposes of this discussion, consider the closed cell insulation, the exterior insulation, if you want to consult that chart. So how much closed cell insulation versus cavity insulation do I need to be in the clear? What's tricky
30%.
about exactly. Well, I'd do the number for the roof. So I'd do 40% in climate zone 5 for a roof. Now, the low risk way of doing this is to insulate the roof just like the wall, insulate on the top. But a lot of roofers do not like to, that's hard to do. We're not used to doing that. A lot of people, for residential projects, they don't want to put exterior insulation on top of their roof deck, because you usually have to do a second roof deck after that. Exactly. In a second set, to make your roof walkable enough to install the rest of it. So it ends up being
just nailing for your roof.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So it's hard to do that. So there's a strong incentive to use spray foam on the interior. Now, the tricky stuff with the closed cell stuff, so in warmer climates, you can use open cell, like in Dallas, no big deal. In your climate, you need to use the closed cell, which is more vapor closed, and it's more expensive. And it can only be applied in passes of 2 inches at a time. And that ends up being, but it's also a foam, right? So in some areas, it's going to be like 1.5 inches, 1 3/4 inches. It's not going to be universally 2 inches, and it can't be applied in passes of more than 2 inches. The risk in applying it in greater than 2 inch passes is
It
explodes.
combusts.
So,
Yeah.
yes, you do not want that to happen on your roof. But if you're like right on the line of the flash and bat type thing, the areas where it's only slightly short can be the different, and you get these sort of odd cold periods, can be the difference between like a real issue and not knowing about it at all. So
Well, the fix
anyway.
isn't easy.
No, it's not, and it's never easier to address it than up front, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's something where I encourage people like to just err on the side of doing more in this, because it's way less expensive to address it on the front end. But with passive insulation, that's the other reason I advise people doing things in increments of 2. Even though suppose we run the calculations, and to get our 40% ratio, we only need 3 inches. Well, just up it to 4, because the incremental cost of the extra inch is a lot less, because you don't have to mobilize again to go and do it.
And to retrofit foam is an absolute nightmare.
Oh,
like
yeah.
To go back in, let's say it's a wall cavity that you're shy on. Like that would be, we've done it once way back when we did deep energy retrofits, where the client wanted us to go in and spray foam an existing wall cavity.
Yeah, it's a real pain.
You drill it and foam it, then you do an infrared gun and see what areas are missing. Absolute disaster.
Oh yeah, it's really not fun. And also the foam isn't magic.
Yeah.
Like it's really hard. Like what we're asking of our tradesmen and women is a lot. That is hard work to get, especially given the more complicated roof geometries that we try to attempt to do this on. It's not easy work.
So you said that you prefer a wall system that's going to breathe or dry from either side, correct?
I never say breathe. I always say dry.
Dry
yes.
from either side. So getting away from spray foam and everything else, I mean, the spray foam that they're using is basically air sealing. If they weren't using a spray foam, even in Boston or the Northeast, and they're using a cellulose with a zip, this is all kind of a non-issue, other than their house may not be sealed as airtight.
No, actually, I think that if you're relying on spray foam to be your air control layer, that's really most appropriate in roof applications, like we're talking about with that we were just talking about. But there's a lot of framing. So for comparing a poorly detailed house with spray foam and without spray foam, the spray foam in the walls, the spray foam will make it a lot more airtight, like substantially more airtight. So if that's all you're doing, if you're sort of an average or below average builder and you make that switch, then your houses will start to feel a lot more comfortable to the occupants and will be substantially better from an air sealing perspective. If you are an attentive builder, the incremental air sealing benefit from your spray foam is almost nil. So if you're using zip and you're detailing it attentively, especially at the big connections, right at the foundation wall to your sheathing, at the roof connection, whatever that is, your spray foam doesn't really do anything for you. You're covered. You've already got that. I forget what else your question was. About the drawing capacity.
Yeah.
I'm pretty open-minded about this stuff, and clients have really, really different goals in terms of what they're trying to achieve. So a lot of times they have a real aversion to using spray foam, and spray foam is really great. It sort of really shines as a retrofit material. When you can't air seal on the outside, you can only approach something from the inside, then that's really, really, really helpful.
And you're limited in the cavity.
Exactly. Like you don't have a lot of room, or whatever. There are tons of applications where spray foam is terrific. I used it to retrofit I'm about to use it to retrofit my crawl space. So I've air sealed my crawl space on the at all the piers and stuff, and I've got my polyethylene ground cover coming up the sides, and I'm going to use spray foam to both air seal and insulate at the perimeter of my entire crawl space, which is something you guys don't do up where you are very much. But anyway, there's no way that I could air seal that, or I couldn't ask a tradesperson in a historic home with like less than 2 feet in that headspace in the crawl space to air seal around all the crap that's under there. Spray foam is a lifesaver for me, and I do it from the inside in a historic home. This house is 100 years old. I get another 100 years out of it. It's going to be fantastic, and I have spray foam to thank. I would not be able to reliably do that with rigid insulation that I'm origamiing around other stuff. So there's stuff that spray foam is great for, and it's also not moisture sensitive, and I'm putting it close to the ground, so that's good. In a wall, yes, all things being equal, I prefer that things dry in both directions, but sometimes it doesn't make sense to only use vapor open materials. So if that was your primary concern, if you wanted to maximize your drying capacity, you could use rock wool on the exterior because it's open, and cellulose or rock wool on the interior, whatever you want, with plywood and a vapor open water and air control layer, and your cladding is drained and back vented and you're happy, and that's great. But that's not always feasible. There are project constraints that dictate all kinds of things. People are more comfortable using extruded polystyrene, say, on the outside, which will restrict exterior drying a little bit. The trick is to try not to sandwich materials together on a wall. On a roof, we make an exception for this, right? So we have no exterior drying on our roof, and we can put spray foam on the underside, which I think is a lovely solution in a lot of cases. And the reason it works is because we don't have that many penetrations through a roof. Our walls, we have tons of penetrations. Service cavity, like we use that service cavity for a lot of things. We've got all kinds of crap going on in the walls, and so it's best not to sort of sandwich something. So if sandwich your sheathing is really what we care about with materials that don't dry on either side of it. So if you were going to use spray foam on the interior, you'd want to use an exterior insulation if you were also using exterior insulation that was like rock wool. Or if suppose you're using extruded polystyrene on the outside, you wouldn't want to use spray foam on the inside. This is like getting really into the weeds here, though, so I'm not sure if that's...
Are you considering Zip to be vapor open?
Yeah, it is vapor open, and all these things are relative, right?
I guess what I'm getting at is everything is so overly complicated right now. Why, and I know that people are moving back towards this, but why isn't it Zip with blown-in fiberglass or dense pack, cellulose, drywall on the inside? It's breathing. It can dry to the outside. It can dry to the inside. Is it just because of comfort level and they want a higher R value within their walls?
That works. Zip with cavity insulation works fine. It dries in both directions. No big deal.
I just feel like why is everyone overly complicating all of this by introducing all of these different WRBs and things that don't breathe and things that do breathe, where it's like, is it just for comfort level? Is it just for a higher R value? Why not frame with a larger dimensional lumber so you have a thicker wall assembly rather than adding 2 inches of foam with then sheathing on the outside of that, or vice versa? It seems like everything's getting complicated.
There's a lot of different things going on, and even your question is so some of this is dictated by the marketing concerns of the companies that manufacture these things. So for example, Zip's competitors have a pretty strong incentive to say, well, you should pick our product because our product is more vapor permeable. And so there's a lot of, I think, misinformation that has motivated misinformation with that particular question. But then there are other things that you mentioned that are kind of other project constraints that people are trying to accommodate in their designs. So, for example, there are a whole lot of people who care immensely about the R value of their walls, and they want to maybe achieve passive house standard, or they want a much more energy efficient building enclosure. And so they want to switch to 2x6 sheathing, or maybe they even want a double stud wall. And so they want more performance out of their wall, but they don't want to use foams. They don't want to use spray foams. They don't want to use extruded polystyrene. They don't want to use foams because there's all kinds of reasons why some people, they don't like the environmental costs of using it, and some people don't like the potential to off gas or whatever. People have all kinds of reasons for not wanting to use foam. And that kind of stuff, when you add these other project constraints, it requires people to pay attention to durability in a different way. So if you're making your wall wider and you're adding more cavity insulation, again, we're making the temperature of the sheathing colder. So now we have to take extra steps to either stop air from getting there, which I don't think is an effective strategy, but that lots of people do this. And that those are the intellos on the inside that have to be detailed really well to stop air from getting to that cold surface. Or they do a double stud wall, which is, again, it's very risky to do this, but people are often very motivated because of other goals and constraints that they introduce to the project.
So one more quick thing along the same lines.
I'm just looking at Nick.
Zip R, essentially the sheathing is now on the exterior.
Yep.
So it's not traditionally, if you were insulating the outside of your house, it would be, inside of that. So when would be a good app? I know that may sound like a silly question, but would it be more so for retrofitting where it would make more sense to use something like that? Because essentially you're just adding more insulation. You're not necessarily moving, that control layer of the foam to the outside. So you could frame with a bigger stud wall. It almost seems like Zip R, if you were using it, why would you be using that? It just seems like would it be like a retrofit where you pulled the sheathing off a house and you wanted to add more insulation to it?
No, I mean,
like if you were building new with it seems there would be other options.
Well, isn't the code kind of leaning towards a thermally broken envelope?
But
yeah, it's leaning towards exterior insulation,
Yeah.
and Zip R counts as it'll satisfy the code for exterior insulation because it is outboard of it's not outboard of your sheathing, it's outboard of your studs. though.
Yeah.
So it's continuous. So it does satisfy it. As for what your options are for retrofit versus a new build, plenty of people do retrofits, deep energy retrofits in cold climates, and find ways they do it from the exterior and they add exterior insulation. It's tricky because you're changing the orientation of or the relationship between your cladding and your window. That the depth changes, and so you have to account for that. But that's a design question too. So there's sort of give and take, but plenty of people do that, and they use exterior insulation successfully. They add insulation, but they're not even resheathing. They're keeping whatever. There's a ton of
I did it for 2 years.
I guess
ways that people do this.
Is there a huge difference between if you were to put Zip R onto a 2x6 wall with cellulose inside that 2x6 wall versus framing with a 2x8 and cellulose and then regular Zip sheathing?
Yes, it is so much. So you get much better performance out of cellulose is about R3.5 per inch, and polyisocyanurate is R6.5 per inch. So you're adding with if our baseline is 2x6 cellulose, by adding 2 extra inches of cellulose compared to our baseline, we're adding adding about our 7. With 2 inches of zip, we're adding,
12.
About 12 or 13. And it's continuous across so your
Exterior.
studs are about R4. So studs are not terrible, but R4 compared to R20, that's a substantial difference. If you put 2 inches outboard of that, you no longer have the thermal bridging, albeit minor because it's wood, it's not metal. You're reducing your thermal bridging. So performance-wise, the Zip R or 2 inches of exterior insulation substantially improves your wall from a thermal perspective. It also substantially improves your wall from a moisture management perspective because a 2x8 wall, that sheathing is too cold. That is a risky wall. That's a tough proposition. But if you use either Zip R or you use exterior insulation, you've way reduced your condensation risk at that surface.
So what if you are building a more traditional wall where it's just a stud cavity and a typical sheathing? You're not doing exterior insulation, you're not using spray foam. At that point,
you can do that. That's a code compliant. It depends on where you are in the country, but let's assume you're in a cold climate. Mm-hmm. You can still build. The code is now requiring you to go to, if you don't use exterior insulation, you can still satisfy the code if you go from 2x4 to 2x6 studs. Mm-hmm. So you can satisfy the minimum code requirement with cavity insulation alone.
But are there concerns with condensation?
Yeah, I think there are. Now, you can legally do it, and plenty of people do, and their homes work okay. If I'm doing the design review, and now keep in mind that I practice primarily in warmer climates, so anytime I'm doing something where it's colder, I'm more, we talked about this at the beginning, you're always more conservative the less experience you have. So I have less experience in this area, so I'm substantially more conservative than I might otherwise be, I think. But the code will permit you to do a 2x6 wall with cavity insulation in climate zone 5. But if anybody's gone to the trouble of hiring me or hiring somebody like you, like they care about their house. This isn't an investment property. This is they're spending some money on this.
Right.
Use some exterior insulation. Follow that. Go to Hybrid Assemblies. Go look at the chart. See what the recommended percentage is, and go to town. And this is actually where Zip R is such a great choice, because if you're right on the line and you don't want to redraw everything, change everything, just pick Zip R, 2 inches of the stuff, and it allows you to reduce the risk and reap the performance benefits at a pretty low incremental cost.
So to argue, you had mentioned that using something like Intello or the Marex, like the Siga product, it needs to be detailed extremely well.
Yes.
And the question,
it sure does.
I guess the question that I think lingers here is that, okay, what if we do a B+ install? And it's detailed okay, but it's not perfect. Are we in the same position if we did an F or a D+?
Is it a pass and fail, not an A, B, and C?
With airflow, it's a little bit more pass and fail. No, it's like an A, B, and C, but less A, B, and C than maybe something else. I don't know if that's very helpful. I guess maybe not.
Well, I guess the question,
it's sort of like our coronavirus, right? Like with quarantines, social distancing, if only if 50% compliance is basically the same as 20% compliance,
right?
At a certain, so it's kind of like that, I guess, where yes, if you don't do that great a job, air goes around stuff, and if you miss something big, then you end up with an issue. Now, here's where I should point out that I'm on the design side. You guys are in the execution side. You're in the field. So from a design, keep in mind that my perspective, and I'm mostly teaching architects. So when I'm teaching, I say, do not rely on the installation. Design it to take that off the table, because you don't know who your client is going to hire. You don't have control over that, but you do have control over the design. So I'm erring on the side of like let's reduce my condensation risk by with insulation, by keeping my surface warmer. It's because that's a solution that I can design into the building. Good installation via air control isn't something I have control over, but it is something that you have control over. And so a lot of people who I sort of butt heads a little bit with, it's more a function of our respective roles in the industry than it is like a debate on physics or science. Like, you can do this, you can control it with a well-detailed interior air and vapor retarder, but on a designer, I don't think designers should count on that.
Right.
If you have a really strong, if you're a builder, a lot of these builders are like who are sort of design building these projects, and they hold the cards here, and they really don't want to use foam. Well, they have a vested interest, or they have a stronger incentive to detail this a lot better and a lot differently. So they'll make a different assessment of their risk than I will.
Yeah, Nick, I think you have a way better shot in making that happen than, let's say, I do. I'm subbing all that out, so I have to then have faith in whoever that person is, with you having so many hands on NS Builders' side to be able to make that happen. Me, as a 1,000-foot view, I think of your assembly as Tyvek blowing on the outside of a house. That it may go on real quick, and it may look good for a minute, but then after the electrician goes through and pulls a wire that wasn't there before,
that's why
something else, it's an absolute nightmare, and it's blown away.
Or 5 years from now, somebody renovates.
Yeah.
Right.
And they don't hire you.
You know, it's a real concern. Like, we've done projects where we've opened up the wall, it's fiberglass, we rip it out, we put rock wool in the walls, and we put the Sega up.
Yeah, and I really don't want to be anti that approach or that stuff.
No, I don't think you are.
What do you have control over?
Right, and I think at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, that is better. Like, we did a better job than what was there, right?
Absolutely.
But at that point, I would like to say you're also the exception.
Do you think that Sega that you're installing at that point is 100% necessary? If you pull, like, when you're pulling out fiberglass, it's craft faced.
Yeah,
Nick, in those walls. I feel like I've never seen a fiberglass install with craft face that's truly doing its job.
Dude, I used to kill it. I used to staple it like crazy, overlapped it.
You know what it's best for?
Writing on
craft.
Wrapping your textbooks.
So the building code requires a vapor barrier and a vapor. Well, okay. The building code requires a vapor retarder on the interior in a lot of places. Now it varies. So it's not just the regular building code. Like, people adopt their own codes, and in places where a vapor barrier is required by code, it's an easy way of complying with the code, but without using poly there. Or something, or spending money on Intello or whatever. So there's a lot of places where you can do, like, Canada's an example. Well, actually, Canada's a weird example because it's very hard to get craft face bats there, but they require a vapor barrier on the interior to deal exactly with what we're, condensation risk on the exterior sheathing. But you don't want to put poly there. You don't want something that's a barrier in any place where you air condition, because now you have we're talking about wintertime. Well, if you air condition your building, we have a summertime problem. If you make the poly, whatever that is, if you make it too cold, we have the reverse problem on the inside. So we fix one problem, but we give ourselves another problem. Craft facing qualifies, it counts as our vapor retarder, code mandated vapor retarder, but it changes its permeance. It works really similar to the smart membranes. The chief defect is defect is that it's hard to detail. So with your Segas and with your Intellos, you can detail those. They're much easier to detail them to be continuous. Your craft paper, you're right about this, staple, whatever, but it satisfies the code. So some place where you don't really need the interior vapor control, but you have to have it, and you want to avoid doing something that's going to screw you up, like poly, you can use the craft face bats, and it's like, who cares? Whatever, do whatever you want. Your drywall is your control layer.
Yeah, I mean, so in our situation, if we were, Nick, you install a ton of rock wool, assuming that it's a standard wall detail with zip or something on the outside, do you think, other than by code, we necessarily need a vapor barrier inside of our wall studs behind our drywall?
Are you asking me or Christine?
Christine, I know you don't know
sorry.
the answer.
Sorry.
Even if I had a shot at the answer,
Because I mean, I feel
wouldn't
like
try.
we've installed fiberglass with craft face bats forever, and it's always been like, this is really not doing what it's intended for. And then a lot of times it's, if we're integrating rock wool into certain areas of a job, but I think I'd be hard pressed to get an inspector to allow me just to install rock wool with no sort of vapor barrier on top of it, but I wouldn't want to install poly. Like, do you think that in our area that we actually need a vapor barrier on top of a rock wool if we can dry to the inside and outside?
So here's what's sort of interesting about this. The sort of more detailed answer is I don't know all of the ins and outs with this, and I'm not sure how much of this has really been studied. But I will say this, that our interior, suppose we were to leave the rock wool exposed. So you've got your cavity wall, you like whatever's your cladding, whatever's your sheathing, you've got your framed wall, and then you've got your walk wall, and then we put no drywall on the inside. They wanted to look at the rock wall, whatever. Your clients are eccentric. You would have a condensation problem. So I guess one answer to your question is yes, you need some air and vapor control in a cold climate. Even in a, I don't know, reasonably mild climate, but one that still has winter, you need something inboard of that. But we already have something inboard of the rock wool, and that's our drywall, and it's painted, and it provides both sufficient air control and vapor control most of the time.
If you
so
detail
we already
it
have
right.
it. If you detail it right, and where we have problems with this is in multi-story buildings, and can you think of where we have the problem is where between the floors. So we'll have say an apartment building, wood framed apartment building, 6 stories. At each floor line, we've got trusses that hold the floor up and a ceiling, and we've got all kinds of services in our ceiling. So we have a condensation risk when warm interior air goes through the ceiling, which is never going to be airtight, and goes through the cavity insulation and hits the sheathing at those floor lines. So we can end up having a real issue with that. Now, how do we fix that? What we do is you either take the interior drywall up past the ceiling plane and seal it to the underside of the subfloor above, but you've got to detail it around your trusses, right? It's real pain to do that. So a lot of my commercial clients like heavily object. So I have to call this out very prominently in the drawings to make sure that it's captured in the bids when the project is bid, or you specify spray foam at those areas, and the purpose of the spray foam is essentially to air seal. So it's doing exactly what our drywall is doing below, but it's just a lot, you don't have to air seal around it. Now in climates like mine in Dallas or in Atlanta, you can do that with open cell foam, so it's not really that big a deal. But in a climate like Boston, or even New York is cold enough where that condensation risk can be an issue. So yes, you do need air and vapor control, but you can provide it typically just fine with the painted drywall.
I feel like the bulletproof system is like rock wool.
I have bricks in my wall, and I feel like I don't have any of these issues other than I spend a lot of money on heat and air conditioning. So maybe I'll go that route.
And I mean, all of this is like best practice that we're learning to reduce risk. But when I started my career, I was doing a lot of gut rehabs in New York City. And so New York's a little bit milder than you guys in Boston, but it's got a relatively similar climate. And in these masonry buildings, we were filling the cavities with cellulose. Is that risky? I mean, yeah, a little bit. Did it work? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, these are compromises, trade-offs.
I literally have
right
bricks
answer.
in between my wall studs in my house, like brick nogging
Right.
in my wall
Fills his
studs.
cavity.
There's no insulation. It's like structural sheathing, brick nogging, plaster.
When I moved, my first job out of college was in Texas, and I worked there for 2 years, and then I'm Canadian originally, and I moved to Boston, which, no offense, I hated Boston. Sorry, I just don't like that city.
See ya.
My bad. Shots
I'm
fired.
not I'm not from Boston, for the record.
All right. Well, whatever.
These guys are. I'm at
She's like, "Well, I
a
don't like New
Philadelphia
Jersey
area.
either."
Oh man. Well, anyway, I was not a fan. It was just, everything was inconvenient, and partially this was probably my experience. I rented an apartment with zero insulation. So I don't know, maybe similar to yours. And my heating and my rent was twice what it was in San Antonio, where I had been living. And I was like, okay, well, I can afford this. I'm being paid more. And then the first winter month, my heating bill for my apartment was like over $500. And I couldn't afford it. I was like, what am I going to do? It's so cold.
Basement apartment.
I'd sleep with crazy stuff. Anyway.
I did a basement apartment where the heating pipes run through your apartment. So everyone else that asked for heat, it's just super hot. So we paid nothing in heat, but you open the windows. When
I worked in New York, that was how our office was heated. It was in a cellar, and it was the hot water pipes, basically. And I would, to warm up, I worked for a great architect, Chris Benedict. Maybe you guys know her. She's does a lot of passive house work. She's so cool, such a character. Anyway, talk about walking the walk. She really believes in energy efficiency and environmental responsibility, and so her office is not heated except from waste heat. So some days are just too cold to work, so she will just close the office. But anyway, we'd have coats on inside, and I'd hug the pipe, and they'd wrap ropes around them. That was, I saw that in other places too. But anyway, I'd go and hug the pipe to warm up, and then go do more drafting.
John, I think you were going to allude to it. You were going to say the bulletproof wall assembly, but
I don't know. I shouldn't be the one saying this.
Well, I was going to say, let's
for
not have you answer.
The bulletproof wall assembly for you.
Yeah, no, I feel like it's.
You're trying to get her to approve what you want to say, so you can just put your head down and run with it, right?
No, so I don't get red and embarrassed.
That's what I'm doing.
No, I feel like it's zip, rock wool, and then do your AeroSeal on the inside. That way you have your air barrier is basically at the sheetrock. Sheetrock goes on, and then air barrier.
You can do that, but you can also reasonably detail this on the interior without
yeah,
air
but I
barrier.
can't hashtag reasonable. I need a hashtag super efficient, high efficient, amazing air sealing. It's the only way I'm gonna get likes.
Reasonable doesn't trend.
Yeah.
Reasonable contracting.
Well, Christine, what would if
we're
if
reasonable
you were building
builders?
A wood stud cavity with a direct applied cladding. So let's forget brick, forget structural brick walls or anything like that. But you're doing an applied cladding wood assembly wall structure. What would be your preferred detail, inside to out?
Way better question.
Okay, so this is a hard one to answer because I don't know what other project constraints there are. So
I live in Boston. I want cedar shingles on the outside of my house.
Okay, so I want a drainage mat on the in between my cladding and my whatever I'm using. I guess, okay, so I've got to be in a cold, man, I have to be in a cold climate.
Cold
It's
climate.
terrible.
We're
So
in Nantucket.
okay. Oh, beautiful. Okay.
Yeah, we're oceanside.
All right. So something really, okay, let's do two. Let's do one with
Nick, just say
exterior
it's Hingham.
insulation, one without. Okay, whatever.
Nick's just got a job in Hingham. It's probably got
Oh,
cedar
there
on
you
it.
go.
He's
Yeah, I might use a detail.
Oh, that's funny. Asking for a friend.
Not me.
Okay.
Someone I know.
So outside to inside, so cedar, some sort of drainage mat, like cedar breather or something, because it's cedar. Mineral wool, a liquid applied membrane over plywood sheathing, since we have no constraints on this job. So liquid applied membrane over plywood sheathing, rock wool in the cavity, because that's just baller, and drywall painted. No constraints. Plaster.
Oh, we always plaster in Boston.
Always.
Oh, there you go.
How big's a stud cavity? 2x6?
Yeah, sure.
I guess it depends on your percentage, right? If you're saying one layer of rock mineral wool on the outside.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to run the calculations and figure out whether I want strapping or whatever. But
just send me those calcs when you're done.
There you go. Well, I mean, just do the little table there to see how much. But yeah, I'd prefer. Suppose I needed more R value on the outside, then I could reasonably do without really complicating my cladding attachment. Then I would part with the rock wool on the outside, and I'd use extruded polystyrene because it has a higher R value per inch.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd meet my condensation control threshold using a different
liquid
material.
Applied?
Because I love how I like detailing with liquid applied membrane. And because I want to use plywood because it dries better and it's more moisture tolerant. But if I was going to use OSB and I wanted to economize a little bit, using OSB and zip is great with I particularly like the liquid applied detailing membrane. So the trick with water control on walls is, number one, I mentioned before that the best way to control water is to have a drained and back vented cladding, not to pay that much attention to your WRB. It's drain and back vent your cladding first. So that's the number one thing. Now the second thing is the detailing of your WRB matters a lot more than just the field of the wall, right? It's very rare that we have issues in the field of the wall. Where we have issues are windows and doors and service penetrations. So for example, I'll have clients that want to use a mechanically attached membrane like Tyvek. They don't want the expense of switching to a fluid applied membrane, or they can't use zip for whatever. They don't want the expense of that, but they want to sort of soup up the detailing for their mechanically attached membrane. So we improve those details at the windows and the service penetrations, usually by using more self-adhered membranes. So I recommend that these clients, usually commercial clients, use a sort of non-standard Tyvek detailing at their windows, where I have them wrap everything with self-adhered membrane, made by Tyvek, as opposed to taking the building paper in. But anyway, the whole point is the takeaway from that is not how to detail the windows. It's that pay attention to the service penetrations and how your windows and doors get detailed, because that's your high risk. Those are the high risk proposition spots, as opposed to making a decision based on performance in the field of the wall. Who cares about the field of the wall? Care about let the detailing drive the bus on that. So anyway, that's what I like. I like fluid membranes because they're so beautiful to detail, especially at windows.
Mm-hmm.
They're just really, really nice. Now people can work magic with self-adhered membranes too, but I
Well,
like that
it's
fluid.
similar. It's similar to John's comment earlier, like tile, right? Where Schluter is a great product with the membranes, but the nice thing about liquid applied, like RedGuard, is that you're rolling it on, and there's you're not building up corners or anything like that. That
Exactly.
and they both can do the same thing. It does come down to install, with either of them. But the liquid applied, to your point, I think you're saying no constraints, where liquid applied is probably more expensive. I'm guessing. I actually don't know.
Yeah, it usually is. It's not. It usually is, but it depends. Like, and also, where are you spending this money? You might save money in labor, so the delta isn't as big as you think. And what tradespeople are you using in that area? Like, maybe you get a good price on something. I defer to, like, we're just, all things are equal in this conversation, but in a real project, this is also where I defer to the expertise of the contractor or subcontractor. I would much prefer that the sub or the contractor use a material that they're more comfortable with than whatever I've suggested, and have it be the first time. Unless they're really game for that, or unless it's something that's pretty intuitive to get. But I don't, the best approach is something that actually can be done well.
Right.
So I'd rather take a hit in performance on paper for more reliability in the field every time.
Yeah.
And that's, some people are less willing to compromise on that because they have some other goal, like they're trying to hit a standard, like a passive house standard or whatever. But I would always rather someone, I guess I'm just really more risk averse. I'd rather work with people who are really comfortable with something than to push them into something that they're not familiar with to get a couple extra points on, whatever.
But I so agree with you that if you force someone to do that, they're going to install it the whole time going, this isn't my game.
Yeah.
And they kind of do it at 60% instead of 100 that they would have with some other product that they're comfortable with.
Yeah.
And then and that's really hard to gauge from a manager or a GC or a builder's point of view, because it's all being applied the same way, and it may be new to you as well. And it's just really tough to understand what kind of application you're actually getting for accuracy at that point.
Right.
It's spooky.
Yep.
Christine, we didn't even talk about it, but how long have you been involved in building science, or has it interested you?
She's going to say a year after we've done 2 hours of a podcast.
Yeah, I kind of just picked it up last year,
Instagram.
I told you I was unemployed for a while. I had some time to really do some research, some Googling. God, no. Well, okay. So I really started getting interested in it when I was in architecture school. I mean, really pursuing it professionally and really having more than a passing interest when I was in architecture school, and I got a job at first in the summer and then during the school year working for a really terrific architect called Chris Benedict in New York City. And she was designing really extraordinarily energy efficient buildings, typically multifamily buildings. And in order to do a good job of, and she would do this, by the way, she would do this without spending any extra money, because she was a really interesting character. She was, she is a very committed libertarian, and an environmentalist. And so she really wants to make sure everything that she's designing is really energy efficient, but she wants to do so. She believes that in order to really change the industry, anything she does has to be financially viable in its own right. So, like, don't fix energy use problems with solar panels. Let's conserve everywhere we can, and every decision we make has to be, economical. Anyway, if you want to do that, you have to really know a lot about stuff like thermodynamics and also construction. You have to understand construction. And that's really where my interest, I guess, started, is is that I spent so much time in the field working for Chris that I really came to love and appreciate construction and like physically how our buildings go together. And that I started in energy efficient design, but afterwards when I went into more consulting, most people are, for better or worse, not terribly concerned with energy use. What they're concerned with, especially on the commercial side, is risk. And in order to help people minimize their risk, you have to understand how things are built, right? So some people, when they're doing these sort of building science design reviews, if you don't understand construction, it's kind of useless. Like, how are jobs typically sequenced? That matters when I'm reviewing a window installation. It all comes together, and to me, that's very fascinating. So in architecture school, I liked architecture, and so I thought, well, this is great, I'll be an architect, it'll be fun. And came to realize that I'm really not very good at the design part of architecture. It's still, what I do is still design. It's just not the aesthetic focus. I'm not making the,
it's not the personality.
Aesthetic. Yeah, it's not the aesthetic. I'm not driving the aesthetic intent for the whole project. So anything in my consulting capacity, I have to make sure that I'm accounting for the design intent, but I didn't set the design intent, the architect did, and I'm helping make that design workable and low risk given the aesthetic constraints of the project and the construction constraints, the division of labor constraints, the climate constraints, the material constraints, all that other stuff. Anyway, and I love it. I think it's such a fascinating field. I love that it means that I get to be good at something that sort of naturally comes to me and still get to participate in these really beautiful projects. Some of my projects are pretty ugly, but a lot of them are gorgeous. And I get to do that in my own. I get to still have a contribution, even if it's not the one I originally set out to do. But anyway, that's so I guess that was in school. I started working for Chris full time probably 15 years ago, maybe a little more. So it's been a while.
And now, I mean, so you took a sabbatical, and now you're consulting by yourself, but you're also running the Instagram, which I think
we can't talk about it. First rule.
Yeah, that's right.
I think probably in the beginning it was almost a hobby, right? That kind of turned it just evolved into this teaching platform where you started realizing that there were people that were genuinely interested, and you have since branded that. And I mean, you do these amazing sketches and drawings and really thoughtful and well explained.
In a simple way, I have to say. For the simple mind over here that likes pictures, I was like, you know what? I can see that.
Well, there's a huge disconnect. I started it it's still a hobby in that it's non-commercial, so I don't make money off of the account in any kind of direct way. There's no sponsorship, and I have no plans to do that. Everything is mine based on stuff that I see, but there's no manufacturer is sponsoring that in any way. So it's still a hobby. It's just a hobby that takes a lot of time. I started it kind of to teach my classmates from architecture school who were now grown up and working they're in professional practice and are smart, attentive, wonderful people who would call me and ask me questions about what they're hearing from a contractor or what a principal told them. And they're like, I know enough to know that I don't think that this is right or this is the whole story, but I am too either intimidated or it's not appropriate for me to press the issue. I don't know enough to press the issue. So what do I do? So I started it for them, and I take pictures from my actual projects. They'd be zoomed in so you can't really identify it, and then I'd mark them up. I'd be like, this is the flashing and this is the and some of it was just sort of anatomy of a building, right, or stuff that architects deal with drawings, and when they're looking in plan and in section, and seeing something in 3D is sometimes jarring for them. Construction is messy. It doesn't look like what they thought it would look like. So making that connection between what you see in the field and what you see on the drawing was helpful. And so I started just doing that for my friends, and then it got to be more and more popular. And after doing it for about 6 months, and like really, like it became a little more popular, and then I was like, oh, I'm going to really try to teach people, because architecture is based on apprenticeship. It's the apprenticeship model, and a lot of people were really generous with their time in teaching me. And at the time, I was working for my father and stepmother's company, Building Science Corporation, and we didn't have any junior staff, so I wasn't teaching anybody. So this, I don't know, it was a way to contribute to a profession that had done so much for me, given my employment constraints. I couldn't teach anybody directly, so I was doing it on Instagram. But anyway, so I started trying, and after about 6 months, I talked to a really good friend of mine from architecture school, who I was like, so what do you think of this? Like, how am I doing with this? And she said, well, to be honest, I really only understand what you're saying about half the time. And I was like, kind of crushed, actually, because I felt like, wow, I'm like actually trying here. I'm really trying. And to hear from a friend of mine who I know to be, I mean, she's one of the smartest people I know. And and she's worked for 10 years, like in the industry. So here's someone with experience who's smart, and I'm not explaining something well enough for her to understand it. That's on me. That's not on her. That's on me. So anyway, so I was discouraged at first, but then kind of encouraged in some ways, because then I realized, well, if she doesn't understand this, then there's obviously a lot of room for teaching and additional stuff that people can learn. In the end, there's room for me to be helpful. There's room for me to contribute. So I started doing more of it, and then when I had to take my sort of forced sabbatical for my immigration reasons, I could devote even more time to it. But it's really fun. It made me way better in my daily practice, because I'm explaining things all the time anyway. Like for money, I explain things. So this made me a lot better at like, it's a skill like any other. Teaching is a skill. So it made me better at teaching. It helped me understand the audience a lot better. Like not just audience like in general, but like our profession better. So I have a much better gauge of where a typical architect is at in terms of their knowledge of construction. I didn't have that before. Anyway, that's been really, so that's helped in my professional practice. It hasn't hurt that I'm more well known at all. And then it also lets me kind of, it's really made me get better, because I get a lot of questions, and responding to questions makes me so much faster with stuff. And it's such a low risk way. I mean, it used to be, not anymore, but it used to be that, like, you know, I had a couple hundred followers, so I'd get a question. It's way easier to answer a question from my kitchen table in my pajamas when I've got time to think about it and whatever. It's way easier to answer a question like that than if I'm in front of somebody's paid me to give a lecture and I'm in front of like 500 people. Now it's not true
Building
anymore.
Summit.
Right, but it's what's funny is that's not true anymore now, because I have like 40,000 followers now. So now it's like, well, I better answer it correctly. I mean, I'm a professional and I care about the accuracy no matter what the context is. So right. There's a certain amount of pressure anyway, and I take that seriously. And I think, Johnny, you were talking about that earlier too, that you're always kind of nervous about what you're installing. And I think that's healthy, because we're dealing with people's money and investment and their profession, and there's so many small business owners in our world. And so it's not only is the final product somebody's house where they live and they raise their children, but the advice I'm giving and the professional education helps people run their businesses, how they provide for their own family. I mean, anyway, I definitely don't take that lightly. But mostly it's just a joy, and it's been a huge benefit to me. It's like taken my skill level so much higher and because I'm dealing with all climate zones. I learn myself from this stuff based on the questions, right? Someone will see something and be like, that's not how we do it in, wherever.
It's almost receiving the questions is the best part.
Yes. Yeah.
Like you receive it and you're like, you're not like reacting to it. You're like, oh, what is your point? Like, what are you getting at? Maybe you didn't phrase it right, but you're getting it. You're drilling down on something that I haven't thought about. And I feel like every time I get a question like that, it's like, oh man, I've done a couple of years of explaining this on social and they still haven't gotten it. So I'm like, how do I drill down on this in a different way? And I've actually kicked a lot of my stuff back to people calling me because to write it back in like this crazy, I've hit the limit on so many posts to text back to somebody that I'm like, why am I doing this? I'm like, here's my cell. Text me tomorrow when you have time, and I'll just jump on a call with you, and I'll be driving to a job site. And it's you don't have proof that you've helped someone like you do with a comment that you've responded to, but it's the same thing. And it's so much more fun listening to somebody and getting their feedback real time instead of responding to them responding back, and there's this lag and this gray area that's created. But I can just imagine you getting and receiving these questions where it's like, you then open back up the post and then look at the detail you wrote and like, what are they getting at? I could just see you doing it.
Oh yeah. And the other part of it too is particularly for my architect followers, and most of them are either architects or architects in training. Builders is a smaller percentage, but so my audience. Hold up,
that's crazy. You have 40,000 followers and most of them are design end of it.
Yeah. Yeah, which is kind of neat.
Nick, we need to be featured on her page.
Yeah. Well, that's a requirement for us to air this episode.
Yeah, well, we'll figure that out. I don't really have I've got a building website so I have the domain name. I don't have the.
You know what we could do is we could just do a really crappy detail and we're automatically featured on her site.
Yeah, it's the wrong advertisement.
No, don't do that. But yeah, so the primary audience is architects, and what architects end up having to do a lot is to respond to questions from people in the field, from either their contractor or subcontractors, or they have to defend the position that they're taking from attacks is too strong a word, but from challenges that come from in the field. And so that makes architects really nervous. They do not like that. And there's also a little bit of the kind of blue collar, white collar divide that is an undertone to all of this. And architects do not like being called stupid and impractical, but builders and subs don't like being condescended to either. Right? I mean, so undertone of sort of hostility, and these relationships are sometimes a little adversarial to begin with, and whatever, it gives a lot of people a lot of anxiety all around. So that said, one of the, I think, most important things that I sort of discovered accidentally from doing these Instagram posts is publicly answering these questions. Mm-hmm. So even if somebody doesn't have the same question, or they already know the answer, watching somebody like me who has a lot of experience answering these questions answer the question, even if it's hostile and rude or whatever, that in and of itself is valuable to a lot of people. And so I'm very grateful for this sort of dual audience too. I'm really grateful for the practitioners who see stuff and are like, why have you done this? Or they'll say, you're full of crap, you shouldn't do it this way. And me responding to that and saying, okay, well, this is why, or you're right. That hasn't quite happened yet, but I've definitely changed something from, or I've changed my perspective a little bit from comments, and had to kind of amend them after the fact. But watching that exchange, like how to respond to a challenge, is valuable for a lot of people, even if you already have your mind made up on the technical stuff. And then also watching how, like, we're all in business of explaining our decisions to people. So sometimes I get this feedback a lot where someone will say, look, I already know how to install a window, but watching you explain it is really helpful because I need to explain it to other people too. And you explained it really well. I'm going to do it that way. And that is enormously helpful to people in addition to just the technical stuff. So it's really fun. I really like that. That is a big part of our job. I mean, we're communicating to people routinely about stuff that doesn't exist yet. We haven't built it.
100%.
Maybe it's not drawn. So how do we do that? That's challenging. And just because you're good at building something or just because you're good at drawing something doesn't necessarily make you good at communicating about it. So some of the practice, like through Instagram, is just in communicating. How do I describe this complicated thing?
Then there's language barriers, and I always joke around and just say I speak construction. So meaning like I could just watch a couple of guys that are my framers talking Portuguese, and I will just jump into the conversation because I know what they're looking at, I know what they're gesturing towards, and I'll be like, I'm fine with that. Leave the two studs, like do that, and they're like, they look at you like they understand that you are understanding them. I'm like, no, I just know where you're going with this, and it's I conclude to that, but then I also draw a ton of stuff. I feel like if I sketch it out, that's my way of. An old business coach told me once is that, you can move pretty fast on a job site because you're trying to, receive everything you can from everybody, but you're not really solving anything if you don't try and draw a question out of that person. So he would say, hey, do your thing, meet with that person, but then before you walk away, because I've always felt like I'm done, then you come back 2 hours later and something's wrong. That's not on them. That's on you for how you explained it. So he would say, hey, pull a question out of them and see how they answer it. And that would be your gauge to see if they've really comprehended what it was. Not like, hey, like do it with my kid. You get it? And my kid would be like,
do you understand what I just said?
Yeah, not that. It's like, hey, what do you think about how this corner is going to work?
What is that, Pulp Fiction? Do you understand? Anyway.
The words that are coming out of my mouth.
English. I won't repeat the rest of the line, but anyway.
Like you're missing some words there.
Yeah.
So that's like the biggest thing I learned over the years is to slow down and then ask for that question. And that's brought me a lot better execution across the board for my subs because it's really just trying to figure that out, meaning, hey, it makes you look for a good question, not that vague one. It's like, you get it? It's like, hey, you cool with that miter? And if they look at you just with that blank stare, they were never mitering it. They weren't thinking that far ahead. So we need to go back and kind of, there's so many times where I'll be in front of something and I'll sketch it out with Sharpie like 6 or 7 times because I still have not hit my point with them as an understanding. And I can't walk away yet. But before I used to walk away because I was like, I got to keep moving. I got to do this. And you keep moving and you're just frantically moving from place to place, putting out fires.
Not actually accomplishing anything. Yeah.
So.
Well, for those that don't know Christine's Instagram, it's Building Science Fight Club.
Where'd the name come from?
It was a joke, kind of, and now I need to stick with it. So the first person I heard say it was a friend of mine, Foster Lyons, but I don't think he came up with it. I think maybe Allison Bales came up with it originally, or used it originally. Some people, I don't know. Some people. I have no idea, but I started. It was a joke. Using it was sort of a joke, like Building Science Fight Club. Remember, I did this. This was for friends. This was like private consumption. But then it became big, and I was like, oh, I guess this is what I got.
Keeping this one.
So it's catchy. Yeah, I mean it's catchy. It's good. The downside is that it's. I mean, I hope people take it in good fun, but this is a weird point in our culture where some people are really not good with jokes.
Mm-hmm.
So Fight Club sounds really combative to people, and so either that's offensive immediately, or they take it literally, and not literally, nobody's actually fought it. They feel like they can be combative, that the point of this is to debate. It says my internet connection is unstable. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, you're back.
You cut out a little bit.
Oh, okay. So some people with Fight Club, they take the they take it maybe a little bit too seriously. They don't take it in the fun spirit in which it was intended, and treat it as like a forum for debating construction practices. And that's not really, it's a fun place to learn stuff, not to, I mean, certainly people can debate things, but it's not, the point isn't to beat people down. It's just to have a little fun and learn something.
So anyone that's listening, if you want to debate something, don't, because she'll fight you, is what you're saying.
That's right, yeah. And I'm tough, I'm scrappy.
Canadian.
That's right.
Well,
That's
Christine,
right.
You just hung out for 3 hours on this podcast.
I'm impressed.
I'm impressed that
Same.
your energy did not drop at all.
Yeah.
At all.
Well, thank you.
No, this was
Thank
awesome. Yeah, all I wanted to understand was dew point, and now I understand way more.
And I was like, don't do dew points. Don't ask that question.
You were like, screw dew points. Let's talk about this. No,
well, the dew points really, that it really intimidates people. I mean, it shuts them down. They're like,
I know.
People get so intimidated by
it. Because I mean, I don't want to go. We're gonna go down the rabbit hole again, but it's like when you ask someone about a wall assembly, it's like, well, you really got to understand where the dew point is. I'm like, all right, never mind.
Yeah,
I don't know where that is.
And you're like, do I have to do math for this? Like,
right.
what am I gonna? Anyway,
but now we know it's
super
there's a
intimidating.
chart.
It's funny. I didn't understand it until we screwed up that roof insulation.
Yeah.
And I had condensation, and I was staring at it, going, "What the f is happening right now?" I was like, I don't get it. Like, we did closed cell. I thought it was bulletproof. Like, what's the deal? And then you bring everyone else in, and they all start scratching their head, and that's really where it solidified for me, because I've seen the charts, I've done it all.
Yeah. And
it was just like, wow, man. That brought me back to like the minimum building code. It's a minimum. Like, if you try and skirt that line, Mother Nature will mess around with you and change it so that line will move. So you should really find like a variance to kind of play within this range.
Yeah, if you guys want that chart, it's on buildingscience.com, and up top you can type in hybrid assemblies, but it's buildingscience.com/document/building-science-insights/BSI.
Just Google building
hybrid
science and hybrid assemblies.
Guys, I got it.
Your dad's a legend. I watched him. I've been at a few of his conferences.
Yeah, he's terrific. I call him a lot with questions, and he
runs the Instagram account.
Pretty much. No, he runs he's the original.
He's Brad Pitt.
That's right. No, but I'll ask him a question. He'll be like, "Well, I covered that in Building Science Insight number 68."
Like 1997.
Whatever. I can't believe how well he remembers this stuff. So he gives me homework, but we'll still answer the question very graciously, which is good. And actually, that's one thing that's really helped with Run the Account is I get a lot of questions, but I have a lot of help too in answering them. Like, a lot of times I obviously I know the answer, but a lot of times I don't know the answer. And that's actually true we talked about this earlier with Instagram or social media not really being the whole story. And I think there's a little bit of a danger. One thing that I know that I'm going to have to pay attention to as the account gets bigger is this idea that people have like encyclopedic knowledge and are sort of the one source and they know everything.
Right.
And I know a lot. I'm really good at what I do, but anytime I'm being paid on a real project, every single paid project that I do where I have a formal responsibility to consult on a job, I consult like an army of people. Maybe not an army, but there's a handful of people every single job that I run decisions and stuff by. And I think a lot of professionals are like that too. You don't see that when you're on a stage with a mic, or on Instagram the only person people see is me. But with like anything else, it's like even my job is collaborative too. I know a lot of stuff, but there's like every building is a prototype, right? We're always doing something new. And this one building I'm working on, they're doing a wine cellar in a way that I haven't ever done before. So I call people about that. So everybody's got their kind of colleagues that they rely on and kind of exchange information with and pay with wine or other favors.
I think people sometimes underestimate their value, and it's not just what you know, but also your network.
Right.
Yeah.
That your network is super valuable, and if everyone had a network as in depth as yours, even though your dad is one of the gods of building science, it increases your value. Like I have a lot of great subs. It doesn't mean I know everything. I also think that the other side of that is, like, people ask me, like, we do investment stuff, we do construction, we do details. I don't know everything, and I try and stay in my lane. So when I'm with my clients and they go, hey, what do you think about this? I go, this isn't my thing. Like, it's as simple as saying I'm colorblind. Yeah. It brings you more credibility.
Yeah.
When, like, a long time ago when I didn't know how to say no, or I didn't know that, or let me check, it gains more credibility when you have to do that, or I'll get you that answer, or I can check with somebody on that. That's really where people really gain value in you, because you're staying in your lane and telling it how it is, not how you think it should be told.
It's also, I think, one of the biggest joys in getting older in the profession is that now, like, the people that you started with, well, they've done their own thing and they're good at whatever that thing is. So now you have somebody to ask. You know, when you were 25, you didn't know who to ask. But the more you grow in the profession, the more you develop this. Your network grows with you too. I'm gaining skills, but those classmates I talked about in architecture school, it wasn't a one-way street. Mm-hmm. They didn't just ask me questions. I have tons of questions that I ask them. So it's fun. This profession is so rich with those types of experiences. Like, we're always learning. That's great. So
you're always teaching. So you just did a webinar, right?
Did I just do a webinar? Does this count as a webinar? Or what are we talking
about? No, not this. Did you do something with building science and beer?
BS and beers?
Oh, yeah. I guess that counts. Yes. Sorry.
Sorry, guys.
Coronavirus.
It was hosted by Fine Home Building. No?
Oh, the one that I just posted today. No, I was just a guest. I didn't teach. I was learning. I didn't teach. I was a participant, I guess. And I had to leave early because just hang out with you guys.
Thank you. With that being said, I mean, obviously, COVID aside, are you doing any webinars or events in the future?
Yeah, so I'm trying to make money somehow. So I'm working on behalf of some material manufacturers who typically would hire me to speak at a live event. They've moved stuff on, or they're trying to move stuff online. So I haven't done any of that yet, but I'm going to do a few events for Huber, who makes Zip and Zip R that we were talking about earlier. Might be doing a few things for Casella Dorkin Systems,
nice.
Which is great because they make drainage mat, and I really like drainage mat. And then I'm trying to do classes. I'm developing classes of my own. So I'm hoping to launch that this summer.
That's awesome.
That is awesome.
We'll see. I'm starting with sort of the longest one, which is kind of subtitled.
Dew point.
Yeah, Dew point. It's like everything I know. But it's kind of like if I were teaching a class to architects getting started and I'm trying to cover pretty much everything, mm-hmm. what would I do? So it's really cool. So I'll probably launch with 3 different classes, but this is the longest one, and
that's awesome.
I'm about halfway through. So
please reach out to us with that. We'll post it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I would love that. It's I had no idea how much work that would be. I mean, I've been like living and breathing this class, and it's really a lot of work. Props to people who make that stuff look easy, but man, it's a lot of work.
Well, that's awesome. Congrats.
Thanks. It's been kind of, I mean, I suppose silver lining, this COVID stuff is obviously not a good situation for anybody, but being home has certainly made it easier to kind of invest my time in ways that I otherwise wouldn't. So that's been kind of nice. And fortunately, I've been lucky enough to pick up some design clients as well who are really and who are working now and really wonderful. So that's good.
Awesome.
But anyway, crazy times, huh?
Well, Christine, we appreciate you coming on tonight.
Well, thank you for having me. It's like a crime that it's taken us so long to all get together. When did I first talk to you guys about this? Like a couple years ago?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty
not even
bad.
sure.
Wasn't the goal to do it live?
I think so.
Oh,
that was the goal in the
why.
original.
Yeah, that's why.
And we've
And
moved,
then
I mean, we just recently started doing this remote amongst the three of us.
Yeah.
So
Oh, wow. Oh, well then this only partially counts. I only get half credit for this.
Yeah.
Once you go back to being in person, I'll come and talk
Well,
to you.
we
Sounds
wanted to
good.
do it at the Fine Home Building Summit, and then we just passed each other, and
Oh, yeah.
it was that was a blur.
She doesn't
Yeah.
remember any of this. She's just pacifying.
uh-huh.
No,
yeah,
I
I kinda
remember,
remember
a
you
little
guys.
bit. Sort of do. No, you guys looked so
Familiar.
Formal?
No, at Fine Home Building, like because you had mics like yours.
Oh yeah.
And
I was
stuff.
like,
You
I'm pretty
guys
sure I was
looked
just
really-
wearing a plaid shirt.
Yeah, like everybody else. That was a room of plaid shirts. I took a photo to send to my husband. It was so funny. That was like the only time I've really, not the only time, but one of the few times I've really felt kind of conspicuously female in a place was that
fair.
was that because there were it wasn't just that there were a lot of men, but there were a lot of men in plaid shirts. There were a lot of men in a uniform that I was not wearing.
Right.
So it was sort of a funny proposition. But yeah, no, that was fun. But that's hard for. I still get really nervous when I speak at those things live.
That's what
So-
you said there, and you hopped
Yeah.
up like you were, totally prepared. So
Well, I was prepared, but I was nervous, and the 15-minute one that I gave, which by the way, if we're still recording and listeners want to see, you can Google my name, Christine Williamson, and Fine Home Building, and both presentations are online. I gave one on stucco and then one on why buildings fail, and I watched it back, which is always painful to watch back what you're presenting. But the shorter one, I can tell that I was nervous. It came across fine, I guess, but it wasn't as lively as any of the others actually.
I don't think a lot of people realize how difficult it is to get up in front of people and speak
It's painful.
until you do it. I think it does get somewhat easier, but I don't know if the nerves ever completely go away. Maybe they tone down some, but it's most certainly not easy.
Yeah, it makes me feel better to hear that from most people. Like most people who speak professionally say, yeah, I still get nervous. So that makes me feel better anyway. But
I think it's normal.
yeah.
I feel like I've been in the crowd where I've been nervous for that person. So it's
Yeah.
like, I feel like everyone's nervous.
Yeah,
So if you just
yeah.
break the ice and get over it. I mean, Nick, I remember we did the first one that's how I met you guys at Kukin. And I was super nervous. I remember they emailed us and was like, hey, do you guys have any things you guys want done? I'm like, turn the temperature to 50. Because when I'm up there, I'm going to be 100 degrees. Like, just turn it way down in the beginning.
I remember he sent us the link so we could watch it. I'm like, definitely not watching.
Not doing it.
No.
Oh man, I did. That the reverse happens to me. I feel if I'm too cold, I can't even fully inhale my lungs, so my voice goes up a few octaves. And if I have caffeine, you think I'm lying or something, or just disturbed. It's no fun. This is kind of a weird thing to say, but I was once a witness in a trial, a federal trial. Anyway, it was a weird thing. And I was super nervous. I don't know why. I didn't do anything wrong. I was just a witness. But you're in the courtroom, and it's oh, this is Law and Order. This is scary. And I'd had it was in my last year of architecture school, and it was the first time I'd had Red Bull before.
Oh my
The
God.
first, not the very first time, but the first kind of month, I guess, that I'd ever had Red Bull, which was glorious. oh, if I could go back to the initial jolt you get from
Gives you wings.
It's called
it gave
chasing
me
the
wings.
dragon.
Oh man, it like made me excited. I would want to stay up all night to work. It was great. But anyway, I had to show up and testify, and I'd had Red Bull that morning, and I was just nervous. And they must have, I don't know what they would have thought of me. Maybe they're used to it. They realize that people get nervous testifying, but it was not like
Testifying on Red Bull might not be the norm.
Yeah, I guess not.
He did it.
I'm
I
sure
guess
they have
not.
people testifying on much worse in federal cases.
True.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It was a weird. It was a fraud case, and I'd rented an apartment. I was living in California, off of Craigslist. There you go. But it was before Craigslist was as sketchy, and it turned out the guy didn't own the apartment. Whoops. So anyway, that started a whole bunch of stuff.
That dude's a rock star.
Yeah, he's in federal prison right now.
That's crazy.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was. I mean, there was other stuff that went on there too, but that's what I had to testify about.
We'll leave it. We'll leave it at that.
Crazy, crazy times.
That was before Craigslist was sketchy. Imagine now.
I mean, right?
All right, Christine.
All right.
What just happened?
My beer got stuck to my mic. Well, I appreciate you coming on, and we will do part 2 live when we're allowed to hang out live again.
Absolutely. I'm game. If I remember what you guys look like by then.
Okay, so we'll be spamming your inbox with pictures of us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, who knows how long this is going to last, so hopefully this will be...
Look at Nick's hair at this point. It's
Yeah.
got
I'm letting
better.
it grow.
It's better end soon.
you're going to have like giant beards and
I can
no
trim
hair.
my
Nick's
beard.
got
I just
Nick's
can't
got
cut
a
my
full
hair.
flip. Look at it.
Is it?
It's
Oh,
going
yeah.
back to
Trump
the, it's
action.
going back behind the ear now.
My husband got a haircut for the first
There we
time.
go.
Nick, I would solve that now.
No,
That's
I
awful.
like it. My
Looks
wife
good.
Oh,
says
there
it.
you go.
I feel like you look
So
like
you
a
got-
horse with like a mane.
Thanks.
Oh man, you guys just all wear hats.
That's what we gotta do.
My hair is fine, guys.
Dude, my hair's
we're not
crazy
ending
when I
this
take the hat
podcast
off.
about how great my hair is.
There you go. All right.
Well, thank you
Well-
very much.
I only had like 15 like comments that she had that were awesome.
Oh, send me
Oh,
those so I
that's
can
great.
tell.
It's
So I
the
can tell them.
timestamps: 40 minutes, 49 minutes, 53 minutes, 149, 216, 237.
You have like an organized mind. Do you draw on windows like
Yep.
Beautiful Mind
Yes.
style?
Totally.
That was good.
Every day. Floors, walls, whatever.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for having me. This was I actually genuinely was sort of like, what are we going to talk about for 3 hours? But I guess
You crushed it.
we
Yeah, you did.
figured it out. All right. Well, have a good night, guys.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Too.
All right. See you later. Bye.
Guys, we have a ton of reviews.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like 7 since last week. I don't think I can read all of these, but I can give it my. No, I can't read all these. So I'm gonna pick 3, totally randomly, and then we'll pick one with a hat for a hat. All right, boom. Solid discussion and some fun too from Tools 8000. This podcast covers a variety of insights and expert discussions. The team has found a unique way to share their deep industry knowledge in a fun and conversational manner. The 5-star guest list offers outstanding conversation depth and experience, and I'm always taking away something new from each episode. Keep up with the outstanding work and the ability to have fun while doing it. Z3M3, top podcast from Top Builder. This is a great listen for anyone in the trades or anyone that's interested in starting a career in the trades. If you grew up watching This Old House and have any interest in fine craftsmanship, these guys for the Northeast will help you improve your game, whether it's business advice, shop talk. I can't get enough of this podcast. Let's get a twice a week thing going. This guy's out of his tree. No way.
Remember what we used to do 2 a night?
Yeah, we were exhausted. All right, We got one more. Nolan Inglesonby. Sorry. I don't know how to pronounce that. You guys are my number one when it comes to needing a little dose of therapy and some real conversation that is not orchestrated. I guess I should say my number one in general. I am new to the home improvement world with an intent to someday quit my day job and continue with my passion full time and bring on the bigger headache of owning my own business to get that amazing feeling of satisfaction that comes with finished projects and happy customers that makes it all worth it. This is why your podcast is so important to me, because like most of the people in the business that I talk to, I need motivation to keep on keeping on, and the clarification that not every day is going to be easy, and you guys make it happen for me. So thank you for the amazing podcast, and I look forward to thinking back on this day when I make my dreams come true and have you to thank you for it. That guy gets a hat. So Nolan Inglesby, I know I pronounced your name wrong. Shoot us an email, info@themoderncraftsman.org, with your name and address. We'll get you a hat shipped out. For all those that I didn't read, we do appreciate your reviews. And then try again next week. We'll read a couple more for another hat. That's a wrap, man. I think this might be the longest.